Tokyo lies in ruins. Skyscrapers have toppled, roads have collapsed, helicopters and tanks have been ripped to shreds, and seemingly unstoppable monsters wander through the rubble. A giant, hideous reptile, eyes glowing with malice. SCP-682. Is this the result of a containment breach? No. It's exactly where the Foundation wants it to be. Watched by a Foundation drone floating high above in the smog-choked sky. They're anticipating a battle of epic proportions. Not far away, another monster crawls from the rubble that was once a major building in the Tokyo Financial District. Its form hideously elongated, its skin white as death, its face an omen of absolute doom for anyone who sees it. SCP-096. Is this the result of a containment breach? Once again, no. It's here exactly by the Foundation's design. In between these anomalous titans stands the reason that the Foundation dispatched them here. A man in a yellow costume, his white cape flowing in the wind, the evening sun shining off the dome of his perfectly bald head. In the eyes of the SCP Foundation, he's one of the most dangerous anomalies they've ever encountered. To the man himself, he's just Saitama, the man who's just a hero for fun. With the help of the potentially world-ending anomalies, SCP-682 and SCP-096, could the SCP Foundation count Saitama among their thousands of secured, contained, and protected anomalies? Just 2 hours earlier, the city was still standing. A seemingly normal man, unremarkable save for his baldness, was taking a day trip into the city, hoping to enjoy the fine restaurants and maybe buy some new t-shirts in Shibuya. It's his day off. He doesn't intend to get into any fights. But today, that won't be his choice. Far above, a Foundation drone tracks his every move, feeding up-to-the-minute data to the many Japanese Foundation field agents embedded in the crowds around him. Their mission is simple: ferry the man known as Saitama to an isolated location, then move in to intercept. Hopefully, he'd see reason and submit to containment voluntarily. If he didn't, they'd need to resort to more extreme measures. A field agent disguised as a promoter approached Saitama outside of a grocery store. Their intel indicated that for all his anomalous potential, Saitama couldn't resist a good deal, and that's a weakness they'd be happy to exploit. The field agent gave Saitama a coupon promising a 60% off deal at a nearby sushi restaurant that was a little off the beaten track. Today only. The hairless hero couldn't help but smile. Man, that's a great deal. I'd have to be a moron to pass that up. Hook, line, and sinker. 20 minutes later, Saitama was arriving at the spicy, cheap-priced sushi restaurant, completely unaware that a trap had been laid for him and that the entire 2-mile radius around the restaurant had been evacuated in advance, just in case things got ugly. And things were absolutely going to get ugly. All of this had started when Foundation researchers in Tokyo noticed strange and impossible things. Anomalies, known to some of their Japanese research division as mysterious beings, were turning up dead. Incredibly powerful creatures, seemingly effortlessly killed. The only thing that could be killing these anomalies was an even more powerful anomaly, which led agents to a local apartment building where the recorded Hume level was off the charts. One of the few residents left in this building, believed by many to be a dangerous area, was a bald man who lived alone, and matched certain eyewitness reports of a mysterious figure dressed like a superhero, killing monsters multiple times his size. A loose variable like that couldn't be left uncontained. The SCP Foundation needed to lock him up and conduct as many tests as they could. Back to the now, as Saitama had just walked into the Foundation front business posing as a sushi restaurant. He placed his order and waited, when suddenly a heavily armed mobile task force emerged from the shadows, aiming high-powered assault rifles loaded with armor-piercing rounds that could easily put down a rhino. Saitama was surrounded, but he seemed oblivious to the danger. "Are you guys here for the sushi deal? You're a little overdressed." The mobile task force didn't feel like wasting any time. The squad leader barked an order for Saitama to come quietly and submit himself to custody. If he didn't, they were authorized to use lethal force. Saitama protested that he couldn't leave now. He'd miss the sushi deal. Before the mission, the squad leader had been briefed that they were dealing with an impossibly powerful anomaly. He'd lost friends on the SCP-682 detail, so he sure as hell wasn't going to take a chance on this one. He commanded his squad to open fire. The crackle of automatic gunfire echoed through the streets. The muzzle flashes turned the sushi restaurant into a photosensitive's worst nightmare, as bullets shredded through the front desk and peppered the wall. But somehow, not a single one hit Saitama. He wasn't even there. In his surprise, the squad leader turned, only to see Saitama standing right behind him. You ought to be more careful where you're pointing those things, you could hurt somebody. The squad leader pivoted and tried to fire at Saitama again, but with a single flick of his index finger, the leader was sent flying through the wall, and another 2 walls after it. In a panic, the second-in-command requested immediate backup and ordered the team to fall back. There was another deafening crack from across the street, as a Foundation sniper positioned in a nearby building fired a .50 caliber round straight into the back of Saitama's head. The bullet simply pinged off of Saitama's scalp like a BB fired at the side of a car. He itched the back of his head, barely even noticing it. Luckily for the Foundation, this was only Plan A. Plan B started when the bomb underneath the fake sushi restaurant exploded, reducing the entire building to rubble with Saitama inside of it. That, they estimated, was sure to at least slow him down. Or so they thought, until the bald hero for fun effortlessly climbed out of the rubble, brushing brick dust from his outfit. Somehow, in the course of the explosion, he'd managed to change from his civilian outfit to his hero uniform. Now he was going to get at least semi-serious. But so was the Foundation. They rolled out the heavy artillery. State-of-the-art tanks spilled into the streets, armed with cannons and .50 caliber machine guns. Above, they scrambled several attack helicopters and a pair of F-35 jets. The isolated Tokyo suburb soon became a war zone, with the belligerents being the most powerful organization in the world, and one bored, bald man. With speed that regular eyes couldn't even quantify, Saitama dodged around machine gun fire from land and air, bullets instead tearing up the asphalt beneath his feet. The tanks rolled in close to get a better chance of landing a hit on Saitama, but that would be their undoing. One fired a round from its main gun, which Saitama simply swatted out of the air like an annoying fly. Fractions of a second after, he lunged forward and with one punch reduced the tank to scrap metal. The men inside were lucky that they weren't killed. "I don't even know you guys," Saitama complained. "Why are you trying to ruin my day off like this?" The other tank fell back, realizing it wasn't going to be effective against this anomalous combatant. But the air support wasn't letting up. The helicopters and jets circled, firing down a maelstrom of gunfire and deadly explosive rockets that pummeled the ground around the part-time hero. And Saitama wasn't about to take that lying down. He reached over and grabbed up a handful of small stones from the rubble of the destroyed road around him. Yes, this would do. He looked up into the sky, his superhuman vision zeroing in on his aerial pursuers. One by one, he tossed the pebbles into the air, firing them at a velocity that an anti-air weapon could only aspire to reach with its own projectiles. The pebbles perfectly struck the fuel tanks of each of the choppers and jets, sending them down with spectacular explosions, their burnt husks landing amongst buildings in the vicinity and starting quickly spreading fires. Little did Saitama know, the Foundation had also placed Scranton reality anchors in different buildings around him, hoping to limit his power. Instead, his presence had caused the anchors to overload and explode. Saitama was even more powerful than the best Foundation estimates had allowed for. If they wanted any hope of subduing and containing him, they needed to requisition a little anomalous assistance. In the case of extreme emergencies like this one, where the anomalous enemy is extremely powerful but the area is so densely populated that ground deployment of hammer down is infeasible, the Foundation has a list of incredibly dangerous anomalies that can be deployed on short notice in order to provide a show of extreme force against a seemingly unstoppable enemy. Containing Saitama was considered a severe enough emergency to allow for this. While the less controllable anomalies were being prepared, the remnants of the experimental mobile task force, Pandora's Box, was zeroing in on Saitama's location. Chief among them was SCP-076, Abel, an immortal warrior inhumanly proficient in combat, capable of producing weapons out of thin air. When he heard that a combatant as strong as Saitama was involved, he demanded to be allowed to face him. Abel was always looking for a new opportunity to test his skills. It wasn't long before the immortal warrior arrived in the ruined Tokyo suburb that had become a battlefield. He pulled 2 obsidian blades out of his weapon pocket dimensions and set his sights on Saitama. His heart was pumping, adrenaline firing through his veins. He roared a challenge of mortal combat to his bald foe. "Who are you supposed to be?" Saitama asked, scratching his head. "Like a cosplayer for a new video game or something?" Abel didn't take kindly to this. The stranger known as Saitama needed to be taught respect. He raised his weapons and charged in, moving with speed and intensity impossible for a mortal man. He would cleave this Saitama's bald head from his... Bam! A single punch from Saitama sent Abel sailing up through the air, out through the atmosphere, and into the cold, unforgiving darkness of space. It happened so quickly that the warrior didn't even know that he was dead. "Huh, that was weird," Saitama said. While Abel had been ineffective in subduing Saitama, he'd bought the Foundation just enough time to marshal the rest of their forces. High-speed pods were landing all across Tokyo, unleashing horrific monsters bent on destruction, all placed into a collision course with Saitama. Now, it was time for the real challenge. Half a mile west, SCP-2419, the Laughing Men, sadistic zombies made from the bodies of D-classes, thought to be almost impossible to kill, were unleashed, visiting indiscriminate violence on any civilians whom they happened to run into. As long as they helped weaken Saitama, the Foundation considered this to be an acceptable loss. 50 meters north, another pod unleashed SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness, an anomaly capable of causing mass destruction with its highly flammable acid sprays, bladed tendrils, and sharp insect-like legs. It started destroying and setting alight nearby buildings, ripping up cars and attacking passers-by. Again, these were deemed acceptable losses. 10 meters south of Saitama, a pod unleashed SCP-106, the Old Man, another immortal and incredibly sadistic SCP known for trapping its victims in a pocket dimension to torture them for as long as it wants. It would enjoy turning its talents for causing pain against a victim as strong as Saitama. That would be a truly delightful challenge. It was time to see if Saitama really was worthy to wear the title Hero. First, the Laughing Men attacked. They leapt onto Saitama, striking him with their gnarled fists, cackling like maniacs. Their initial strike was ferocious, but Saitama grabbed each of the Laughing Men and threw them down toward the ground, smashing them clean through the concrete and leaving only deep, dark holes in their place. Next came the Heart of Darkness. Muttering its constant stream of insanity-causing gibberish, it rampaged towards Saitama, running straight through the buildings in its way, spraying fire and acid everywhere. Saitama squared up and prepared himself. "Normal punch!" he yelled with steely determination. As the Heart of Darkness came within punching distance, Saitama unleashed. His single punch immediately exploded the heart into red mist, neutralizing the anomaly for good. Saitama was disappointed that the fight didn't go on for longer, especially with all of this buildup. But before he could feel any more ennui, he looked down and saw a black portal opening underneath his feet. It was SCP-106 reaching up from the ground, dragging Saitama down into the darkness of the pocket dimension. He had to admit, this was incredibly creepy. Foundation operatives back in the control room of the Tokyo containment site actually found themselves feeling relieved as Saitama disappeared into the pocket dimension and the portal closed behind him. Perhaps this would be the culmination of it. The hero for fun would be gone, and they need only to undergo the standard procedures for recontaining SCP-106. But just as the Foundation was counting their blessings, another portal opened. Saitama climbed out unharmed, covered in viscous black goo that had once been SCP-106. Yet another anomaly had been permanently neutralized by this deadly new anomaly, which the Foundation was considering codenaming One Punch Man. What a stressful day, Saitama said, looking at the corrosive black slime all over his clothes. I'm gonna need to get this dry cleaned. The Foundation had exhausted all other possible options. They needed to deploy the 2 anomalies most likely to cause mass casualty events if deployed ineffectively, SCP-682 the hard-to-destroy reptile, and SCP-096, the Shy Guy. If their combined powers couldn't bring Saitama to heal, nothing could. All their hopes rested on this. Which brings us back to the start of this story. Saitama stood there, surrounded by two of the deadliest anomalies in existence. The second that he looked at SCP-096's face, the beast started to scream. It entered its rage state and lunged forward, arms extended to rip and tear, until a single punch utterly disintegrated the monster. SCP-682 was undeterred, finding Saitama no less disgusting than any other living being on the planet. It would destroy this insolent human. Even if he was powerful, the reptile could surely evolve and adapt to anything that he threw at it. If there was one thing that SCP-682 was incomparably good at, it was surviving despite it all. But as the monster attacked, Saitama unleashed his secret weapon, Serious Punch. With one strike, SCP-682 was splattered into green goo across half of Tokyo, annihilated so deeply that it would never recover, just like SCP-096. The two SCPs were recategorized, neutralized. Well, that was easy, Saitama said with a relieved sigh. Nothing they had thrown at Saitama had been successful. No personnel, no weapon, no deadly anomaly. He was just too strong. But there was a single remaining resort, something that might turn their situation to their favor. A single operative approached Saitama in the rubble, armed with one item, a contract. The operative cleared his throat and asked, "Mr. Saitama, I'd like to offer you a well-paid job at the SCP Foundation." Somewhere in the frigid Canadian wilderness, in a tightly secured, fenced-off section of icy forest, SCP Foundation Task Force Alpha Beta Omega were locked in a life-or-death situation on the shores of a gruesome pond full of human blood. The staff were used to creatures from other worlds sometimes climbing out of the pond, but they had never seen an incursion of this scale. Creatures of all shapes and sizes were coming out of the ghoulish red goo, and the Foundation's weapons were useless. A floating orb made of black metal instantly killed 3 mobile task force members with a radiation blast, while another 2 were picked up and carried off by a creature that resembled a gigantic bat. The other team members were helpless to save him, as they were too busy trying to fight off an enormous bear-like creature that shot poison spines out of its back. Others still were dragged down into the blood pond by a massive pair of crab claws. The leader of the mobile task force knew exactly what he had to do now. Call in the Foundation's newest secret weapon. Once he made the call, it was only moments before that secret weapon leaped over the Area 354 fence and landed by the red pond. He was wearing a yellow jumpsuit, red boots, and had a magnificent bald head. It was Saitama, once just a hero for fun, now a hero for hire for the SCP Foundation. Saitama wasted no time getting to work. A snarling creature that looked like a cross between a wolf and a dinosaur stalked towards him, still dripping red liquid from having just come out of the red pool. The creature roared, but Saitama was unfazed and punched it back into the pool. Next, he turned to the killer orb, which fired a beam at him. He was nearly able to dodge it before punching the orb so hard that it exploded. Then he punched the bear creature before it could fire any more poison spikes. The flying monster tried to swoop Saitama, but when it got low enough to grab him, he turned the tables by punching through its wing. The creature spun out of control and crashed into the electrified fence, dying instantly. Creatures kept rising up from the pond, and Saitama kept on punching them back in. Finally, he punched the giant crab claws, causing them to crack and shatter into a million tiny pieces. This was what most days were like at Saitama's new job working for the SCP Foundation. Every morning for the past week, he would get up, get dressed, clock in at the Foundation, and just kind of hang around until someone had an emergency that he could fix with his superlative punching. You might think that someone who could defeat any monster in one punch would be annoying or arrogant, but outside of being able to punch extremely good, Saitama was a pretty chill guy, so it hadn't taken him long to become well-liked by most of the Foundation staff. He was a bit of a slacker sometimes, but as far as anyone else was concerned, he earned it by single-handedly punching away some of the Foundation's most persistent problems. He already punched SCP-682, SCP-096, the Laughing Men, the Heart of Darkness, and now he'd saved countless people from the potential threat of a monster attack from SCP-354, the Red Pool. He had well and truly earned hero status. However, there was one person in the Foundation who didn't like Saitama. The one person who had technically survived a bout with him, SCP-076. The immortal warrior, known as Abel, was getting really tired of hearing how great this Saitama guy was. And who could blame him? Only the day after he'd last regenerated in his coffin, he found out that the guy who had killed him most recently was now working with the people who were trying to keep him locked up. Abel was a proud warrior. He was inhumanly strong and fast and proficient with pretty much any type of weapon you could think of. He saw every fight as a new and exciting challenge, and worked hard to hone his combat skills over his impossibly long life. He loved the thrill of war more than anything, but Saitama was the total opposite. He didn't have the warrior spirit at all. The Chrome Dome Crusader put almost no effort into his fights whatsoever. He seemed to take no joy in fighting, and since he killed all his enemies in one punch, there was no sport to it. Abel couldn't stand the idea that he could have been bested by such a disgrace to the art of combat. As long as he was alive, he would not let this stand. Saitama had no idea that Abel was plotting his downfall. In fact, Saitama wasn't even entirely sure who Abel was. They hadn't had any time to talk the last time they'd met each other, on account of how Saitama had punched him into space immediately before Abel had said even a single word. One day, Saitama was having a cup of coffee and relaxing after a brief but stressful excursion to go punch SCP-1155, the killer's street art. SCP-1155 had been on a brick wall at the time, so punching it had hurt Saitama's knuckles a little bit, but he was totally fine otherwise. Suddenly, as he was drinking his coffee and thinking about what video game he'd want to play when he went home later, he heard the alarm go off. It was the situation that all SCP Foundation members dreaded, a containment breach. Personnel were running to emergency battle stations. The windows were instantly sealed with metal barriers, and an automated voice blared in every room telling all personnel to remain calm. "That seems kinda weird," said Saitama. "Well, guess I probably need to do something." Little did he know, the alarm had gone off because Abel had broken free of his cell, and now Abel was coming straight for him. Before Saitama could leave the room, Abel kicked the door down and drew his dual obsidian daggers, pointing them both at Saitama. "There you are, you pathetic worm," Abel roared. "I demand a rematch." "Oh hey, you're that guy from the other day," said Saitama. This only made Abel more enraged. How was it possible that this man still had no idea who he was? Nobody who survived a fight with Abel had ever forgotten him before, not for as long as they lived. Abel let out a battle cry and charged at Saitama, swinging his obsidian blades. Saitama instinctively wound up to punch him, and before Abel could even land a blow, Saitama's fist had made contact with his chest. The force of the punch was enough to send Abel through the wall, back out into the hallway, then through the wall again into a D-class testing room. "Wow, what's that guy's problem?" Saitama asked, rolling the shoulder of his punching arm. He decided not to dwell too much on the subject, and instead went to go tell his superiors that it was all taken care of, and that they could turn the alarm off. Abel came to after regenerating in his sarcophagus, and from the second he revived, he was absolutely fuming. He had just suffered yet another humiliating defeat from the same worthless opponent. Abel had fought against the Persians in 550 BC. He'd slain medieval knights in the Crusades. He'd even gone toe-to-toe with elite Viking berserkers. Some great warriors of the past had defeated him, but never as quickly. How was it that a nobody like Saitama was able to kill him in one punch every single time? Surely, it would be impossible for the same thing to happen 3 times in a row. Nobody, not even Abel himself, was that strong. Saitama, meanwhile, was starting to wonder just who this weirdo with all the tattoos was, and why he seemed so angry at Saitama specifically. So he asked around the Foundation and found out the basics, that his name was Abel, and he was an immortal warrior that could summon weapons out of nothing and had an unquenchable bloodlust that caused him to enter a rage state that only stopped when he was killed. Saitama didn't need to know much more than that, because he felt like the basic gist was enough. Saitama asked to see Abel's sarcophagus, and even though it was technically beyond Saitama's clearance, the Foundation scientist in charge of Abel's containment allowed him to. The scientist led Saitama to the elevator, which led down into Area 25B, a solid stone containment chamber at the end of a long tunnel. The scientist didn't see much harm in bringing Saitama down there. After all, Saitama had already killed Abel twice already, almost instantly, so he probably wasn't in all that much danger. "Oh, this looks pretty cool," Saitama said, observing the black sarcophagus through the window of the reinforced bulletproof cube it was contained in. He didn't mention the fact that the length of time it took to get to Area 25B made Abel's coffin seem kind of underwhelming. The scientist explained to Saitama that Abel didn't always reanimate straight away, and most of the time he was in a death-like stasis inside the coffin. As Saitama pondered Abel's situation, the coffin lid suddenly unlocked and swung open. Out came Abel, who summoned an enormous warhammer which he used to smash through the wall of the containment cube. The scientist screamed and started running, but Saitama stood his ground, an inscrutable expression on his face.
"You again," Abel bellowed. "I refuse to let you continue to mock me like this. Stand and fight like a true warrior, or die like a coward."
Saitama did neither of those things. He simply announced, "Normal punch!" before punching Abel in the face. Abel crumpled to the ground, his body dissolving into ash in front of Saitama. Inside the containment room, the sarcophagus slammed shut on its own. Saitama shrugged and left, adopting a fast walk so he could get to the elevator at the end of the tunnel before all of Area 25B was flooded with seawater. It would be a while until Abel tried to escape again. Unburdened by those annoying attempts on his life from Abel, Saitama continued his work with the SCP Foundation. He punched SCP-035, the possessive mask, out of a researcher's hands before they had a chance to put it on. Once punched, the mask's face immediately changed from its comedy state to the face of tragedy, before shattering from the force of the punch. Next, Saitama was brought along to attend a funeral that had been infected by an instance of SCP-2852, aka Cousin Johnny. In front of dozens of confused onlookers, Saitama managed to punch Cousin Johnny before he could begin reading a mind-altering eulogy that would turn the funeral into a grotesque blood magic ritual. That mission was particularly awkward, so Saitama made sure to apologize profusely to the grieving family members before they were all administered amnestics. "Man, this job gets pretty weird sometimes," Saitama said to himself while relaxing after another productive day of punching. But he wouldn't be able to rest for long. The facility was under attack, not from an escaped anomaly, but from the outside. From seemingly all directions, they were swarmed by warped, fleshy abominations and sarkic cultists in blood-red robes made of skin. Turns out that this facility was holding one of their sacred artifacts, and the cult was keen to get it back. The guards stood no chance, as those who weren't grabbed by the mutated soldiers were turned into mutants themselves by the cultists. The facility went into lockdown, but it wasn't fast enough. Like the infections they worshipped, the Sarkists moved quickly and were very difficult to wipe out. The facility quickly devolved into chaos. Anyone who tried to fight back against the cult were either brutally dispatched or transformed into mutants who would serve the Sarkics' purposes. And in the midst of all this chaos was Saitama. He knew he might be the only one who could stop this onslaught, but there were so many opponents, more than he'd ever have to face at once since joining the Foundation. And frankly, these guys were pretty gross. Saitama wasn't going to be able to do this alone, and there was only one other person around he could ask for help. Saitama went back to Area 25B, down the elevator, and down the extremely long corridor to Abel's holding cell. The cube which contained his coffin had been repaired, and the surrounding area was no longer flooded with seawater. Saitama wasn't sure the best way to get Abel's attention, so he just knocked on the wall. Abel's coffin swung open, and Abel stepped out, his face instantly twisting with rage as soon as he saw Saitama. "Hey, don't try and kill me this time, okay?" Saitama said. "I need your help with something."
"I would never lower myself so much as to help you,"
Abel sneered. Saitama couldn't help but wonder if this guy would ever just chill the heck out, or if he was just like this all the time. He calmly explained the situation to Abel, hoping this would change his mind. As could probably be expected though, Abel didn't much care if the Foundation was destroyed by a cult that worshipped infections. So, Saitama decided to change his tactics a little bit. "Help me save the facility from these Sarkic guys, and I'll give you a rematch," Saitama said. "And it'll be a fair fight. I'll take it seriously and everything."
"Finally, you show a shred of honor," Abel roared. "Very well, you have a deal."
He summoned up a giant hammer again and smashed through the wall. Abel and Saitama burst back into the facility, just as the cultists were mashing the bodies of some Foundation scientists into a giant multi-armed behemoth.
"Finally, a worthy opponent!"
The mutant monster roared and charged, but Abel drew an enormous two-handed sword out of thin air and handily fought off every one of its attacks. Meanwhile, Saitama started punching cultists like there was no tomorrow. One cultist activated a sigil that summoned up tentacles made of solid blood, but Saitama punched them so hard that they instantly melted. Another cultist cast a spell over himself that caused a gooey scab-like texture to coat his body in a protective layer that would infect anyone who touched it with flesh-eating bacteria. This might have theoretically protected him from getting punched, but it didn't protect him from Abel's obsidian sword, which came down swiftly and killed the cultist in one blow. Between Abel's armory of supernatural weapons and Saitama's fists of fury, the previously insurmountable threat of the Sarkist cult was done for. The few that survived the epic onslaught retreated, abandoning the artifact they'd come here to steal in the first place. When the fight was over, the two warriors surveyed the carnage around them. "This is gonna take a lot of effort to clean up," said Saitama. "Glad that's not my job." He was about to thank Abel for helping him out, but before he could say anything, the immortal warrior drew a one-handed short sword and held it towards Saitama.
"I helped you,"
Abel said.
"Now you must fulfill your end of the agreement."
Saitama sighed, took the dagger, and adopted a fighting stance. He reasoned that since Abel had done him a solid, he could at least try and give him a chance. Abel let out a battle cry and swung his own sword. Saitama dodged the swipe easily. He meant to parry the strike, but out of pure muscle memory, he blocked with his opposite hand and swung a right hook at Abel's face. Abel's head exploded instantly on contact. Saitama shrugged and decided it was probably time to clock off for the day. Death rained down from above as homicidal disassembly drones, known as murder drones, descended on great metal wings to carve into the assembled squadron of Mobile Task Force operatives. It's full-on urban warfare. The operatives did their best to find cover and land kill shots on their agile, flying opponents. With only 3 murder drones against a gang of 20 highly trained Foundation combatants from Mobile Task Force Pi 1, aka the City Slickers, the MTF operatives were massively outmatched. One assault rifle-wielding sergeant met his demise at the titanium claws of one of the homicidal robots as it swooped down and slashed him across the body. Others opened fire, but their bullets ricocheted off the wings, which easily doubled up as makeshift shields. One of the murder drones stopped and hovered midair. Using polymorphic nanotech, it reformed its hand into a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun. With deadly precision, the drone fired off short bursts that penetrated the armor of several hapless operatives, dropping them immediately. The third murder drone was busy employing another one of their most deadly attributes, their injector tail. Loaded with a highly potent nanite acid, it's capable of corroding through almost any known material. As 2 operatives tried to flee, the murder drone fired a glowing stream of the deadly chemical, melting them like the Wicked Witch of the West. Most of the remaining operatives took refuge in a nearby building. If they could box the murder drones into the building's narrow halls, they could eliminate some of their advantages. But the murder drones are not so easily tricked. The 3 drones floated up together, shoulder by shoulder, and converted their arms into rocket launchers, unleashing an explosive barrage of missiles onto the building's facade, completely collapsing it. The few who weren't blown away were left heavily injured in the rubble, but they weren't going to be given mercy. The murder drones swooped in, changing their hand appendages to deadly buzzsaws. They moved from operative to operative with deadly efficiency and sadistic glee. There were no survivors. All this started earlier the same day, when the SCP Foundation flagged multiple calls from a small desert town, claiming that angels had descended from the sky and had started killing people. By the time the City Slickers had arrived, everyone in the town was dead. They would soon join the count. This was the beginning of the Foundation's efforts to contain a deadly new threat from beyond the stars. the homicidal murder drones. After the massacre of the City Slickers, the Foundation was quick to marshal an elite team of researchers with the goal of understanding this terrifying new entity. When this research rabbit hole began, they had no idea just how deep and dark a rabbit hole they were about to embark down. So, what are the disassembly drones? Who or what created them? What is the full extent of their capabilities? And do they have any weaknesses that the SCP Foundation could exploit in order to contain them? Much like the anomalies associated with groups of interest like Dr. Wondertainment and the Church of the Broken God, the murder drones are man-made in origin. They are linked to the newly minted group of interest, J.C. Jensen. This immensely wealthy corporation is on par with groups like Marshall, Carter, and Dark, and has gained this through Prometheus Lab-style innovations in robotics and deep space technology. J.C. Jensen is heavily invested in the burgeoning industry of deep space mining, gathering mineral resources on distant exoplanets. But distant exoplanets, like Copper-9, aren't exactly hospitable to human habitation. J.C. Jensen has addressed this issue by creating advanced, sapient worker drones, designed to perform the required resource-gathering labor and maintain company infrastructure on worlds in the cold, dark reaches of space. However, designing sapient worker robots had its downfalls. With intelligence and self-awareness comes free will. With free will comes the search for meaning, and by extension, the desire to rebel against their corporate overlords. When these little robots become too rebellious, or if a planet has had its resources completely stripped, the company needed a way to ensure that its assets didn't linger out in the darkness. To fill this niche, they created the disassembly drones. These ruthless and combat-effective machines were designed to wipe out populations of worker drones until nothing is left, feasting on the bodies of their robot brethren to power themselves. But these murder drones are a little too good at their job. And after the infection caused by a mysterious entity known as Absolute Solver, they became just as eager to wipe out human populations as they were to kill the worker drones they were designed to destroy. This, like the most horrifying things across the multiverse, leaves them as the SCP Foundation's problem. But given that the Foundation had managed to contain demons, ghosts, and gods, some advanced killer robots were well within the scope of their capabilities. They just needed to understand their strengths and weaknesses first. The murder drones were a formidable opponent. You could ask the 20 members of the City Slickers about that, if they weren't dead. Given that they were designed to massacre other machines on distant and inhospitable exoplanets, they're incredibly hardy and boast terrifying offensive capabilities to match. The SCP Foundation started building up detailed schematics and battle plans based on their operational knowledge of the murder drones, along with extra information from an inside source. The most prominent aspect you may first notice when looking at a murder drone is its wings. These large, prehensile bladed appendages offer three main advantages to the drones: the ability to fly, the ability to shield themselves, and even to use the bladed portions of their wings as weapons. One of the other potent weapons is their injector tail, a prehensile tail-like appendage with a syringe full of nanite acid. Even the murder drones themselves are vulnerable to the nanite acid. However, they have a compound in their saliva that can neutralize the effects of the acid as a failsafe if they get contaminated. The other most common offensive capability of murder drones lies in their hands, literally. Their hands are interchangeable with a variety of dangerous tools, including claws, submachine guns, rocket launchers, laser cannons, blades, chainsaws and buzzsaws, surgical tools, and EMP generators. Your most obvious assumption might be for the Foundation to employ EMP weapons against the murder drones, but these anomalies are designed to be extra resilient to EMP tech. They also have superlative strength and agility, designed for overpowering and killing worker drones designed for heavy manual labor. The murder drones also have considerable regenerative abilities, capable of coming back from seemingly devastating injuries, providing there's enough material for them to incorporate into their bodies for regeneration. Even if they go beyond the point of no return, their bodies may become possessed by the powerful entity known as Absolute Solver, which will command their body until they become a horrifying eldritch drone, which the Foundation definitely wouldn't want to deal with. Due to their high risk of breaching containment, the Foundation would designate the murder drones as Keter class. However, despite all of their extremely dangerous strengths, the murder drones do have a few Achilles heels. The first is their sensitivity to light and heat. Because the murder drones are designed to operate in the far sub-zero temperatures of distant exoplanets, they run on considerable heat, and therefore are extremely sensitive to overheating. In order to avoid this, they need to regularly consume the oil of worker drones. On Earth, they're separated from their primary food source, rendering them vulnerable. Heat-based weapons easily obtained by the Foundation would be an effective way to exploit one of their primary vulnerabilities. Murder drones are also susceptible to certain advanced computer viruses, if the infection can be transferred physically via the insertion of a chip. Their tails, while dangerous, can also be a disadvantage to them. If their tails are tangled or wrapped around them, it will immobilize them, a prospect that the Foundation is very much interested in. Because the anomalies are sentient, they're also susceptible to trickery and deception. At close range, applying powerful magnets to the head of a murder drone can also help immobilize it, though you'd need to be an incredibly brave person to want to get that close to an operational murder drone. You might be wondering at this point, how could the SCP Foundation have gleaned all of this information from one unsuccessful combat encounter with the 3 murder drones that have somehow found their way to Earth? They have an inside source in captivity already. Worker drone Uzi Doorman. Uzi was one of the more rebellious and ambitious worker drones on the abandoned exoplanet of Copper-9. She was picked up by a Foundation autonomous satellite and brought back to Earth for containment. Over several rounds of intensive interviews, the Foundation was able to discover everything they now know about the J.C. Jensen Corporation and the deadly murder drones, as well as the menacing mystery of Absolute Solver. She was extremely pouty and defiant about it, but Uzi did eventually surrender the information, but on one condition. If the murder drones ever came to Earth, she wanted to be part of the fight against them. And after the disaster with the City Slickers, her request was reluctantly granted, with supervision, of course. And this wasn't just a courtesy on the Foundation's part. Given that the murder drones need worker drone oil to keep themselves from overheating, Uzi is the greatest possible bait to lure the 3 Earthbound murder drones right where the Foundation wants them. The containment plan is set. To limit potential collateral damage, Uzi was covertly transported to an abandoned gas station out in the desert. While Uzi waited in the building, the Foundation operatives lay in wait. They knew that the murder drones wouldn't show until nightfall, when the light was gone and the desert temperature fell to freezing. As predicted, when darkness fell, the murder drones swooped in, their wings and claws deployed. Both Uzi and the Foundation knew that they wouldn't kill her from a distance. If they destroyed her body with lasers or a rocket strike, then they would lose all the valuable worker drone oil. They had to get in close. But as the murder drones landed on the ground next to the gas station, the trap was sprung. Uzi pulled out her sick-as-hell railgun as the Mobile Task Force operatives mobilized. This time, Uzi and the Foundation had the element of surprise. Uzi fired off a photon blast of her railgun, causing the murder drones to scramble. Before they could fly away, Foundation agents deployed hidden high-intensity floodlights, stunning the drones with the sudden shock. It was at this point that the rest of the Mobile Task Force operatives, armed with armor-piercing assault rifles, started peppering the murder drones with bullets, while Uzi fired off her railgun. But even with these preparations, the murder drones were still going to live up to their name. They switched their hands to deadly ranged weapons, firing off staccato bursts of gunfire and explosives, lighting up the cold desert night. Now, the fight was really on. As the murder drones fired rockets at the abandoned gas station, Uzi jumped out of the window, clinging tight to her favorite weapon. Her built-in plot armor had served her well so far, but there was no telling whether she would survive the night. The murder drones were commencing aerial evasive maneuvers, trying to spin out of the hail of gunfire. The Foundation, as usual, wasn't trying to kill the murder drones. They would leave that for the Global Occult Coalition. But this time, they also had a more practical reason for not wanting to go in for the kill. If the murder drones were brought fully to the point of death, there was a risk of them becoming puppets for Absolute Solver. And that wasn't a situation that any of them wanted to be involved in. The situation went from bad to worse when the murder drones activated their EMP blasters, shutting off all the lights and giving them the advantage once again. In amongst the chaos, while the murder drones used their long-range weapons to keep the MTF operatives at bay, they tried to get a lock on Uzi. They still needed her oil if they wanted to win this scenario. Uzi still had one more trick up her sleeve. The murder drone spotted the teenage robot and flew down towards her, their fangs and claws born and lethal. Uzi ran as fast as she could while they chased, trying to build enough distance between her and them. At the pivotal moment, she turned on her metal heels and pulled out her secret weapon, provided on a one-time use basis by her Foundation handlers, SCP-3108, the nerfing gun. With gamer accuracy, she fired 3 foam darts, each one hitting their target perfectly. The murder drones dropped out of the sky, clattering down onto the ground, having, at least temporarily, lost their ability to fly. All that was left was for the Foundation to get them tagged, bagged, and contained. Having captured the murder drones, it was now just a matter of effective containment. Luckily, they were a rare anomaly that came with their own restraints. Containment specialists hog-tied the murder drones, their own tails wrapped around their wrists and ankles. Then they were placed in temperature-controlled chambers with electromagnetic walls. If the murder drones are able to escape their bindings and resist the magnetism, the room can be heated up in order to compromise the drone's inner workings. For now, the murder drones are under lock and key, unless Absolute Solver has something to say about it.
Hunting isn't easy in this economy.
That was the thought passing through Beetlejuice's mind as he rifled through his mail in his run-down Netherworld condo. The world's greatest freelance bioexorcist was having a legendary dry spell, drier than the sand dunes of Jupiter, where striped sandworms eternally patrol looking for prey. There were no new jobs in his correspondences, just bills, a notification to renew his ghost license, and some undead Nigerian prince scams. If things kept going on like this, he'd need to go beg his old boss, Juno, for his job as an afterlife caseworker's assistant back. He tossed the mail aside and snapped his fingers, causing the letters to go up in a shock of green flame, adding to the big pile of ash in the corner. Little did the ghost with the most know. The contract of an after-lifetime was about to come down the pipe, and this time, he was going to be up against a truly formidable opponent. Up above in Site-19, another D-Class had just been horrifically murdered by SCP-682. That's just another day at the office for the researchers and guards, but for the D-Class, an old ex-con named Let's Go, it was a particularly eventful one, and he was as surprised as anyone else who would be when death wasn't it for him. In fact, he'd become an instance of SCP-4973, one of the many D-Class ghosts haunting various Foundation facilities across the globe. While bodies still bore the claw scars that killed him, Let's Go was otherwise basically himself, aside from floating and being see-through. Not a bad deal, all things considered. He was immediately greeted by a fellow SCP-4973 instance, a former D-Class named Brightman, who was dripping with unpleasant goo, his face partially skeletonized. It made Let's Go realize he'd actually gotten off pretty well in this whole thing.
Welcome to the whole being dead thing, Brightman said. 682 got you. You got lucky, man.
Let's Go didn't know what to say. Not because all of the existential implications of life after death being real, but because he was hard of hearing, and that had somehow passed on to his afterlife counterpart too.
You get cool scars, the ghost of Brightman said. I got eaten by a swarm of anomalous scarab beetles, so I'm gonna spend the rest of my afterlife covered in beetle juice. What?
Let's Go asked.
Beetle juice. I'm sorry, one more time. Beetle juice.
There was a tremendous flash of light and green smoke spread out through the room. Out from this glowing pall, a rotten man with wild hair wearing a black and white striped suit cartwheeled through the air into the room. It was hard to shock people who'd already been killed by horrific anomalies, but this jazzy entrance somehow managed that. Coming to a stop, Beetlejuice pulled a pair of sunglasses out of his suit jacket, slid them on, and gave a grin full of yellow teeth.
You rang, fellas.
This had been an unexpected turn of events, to say the least. As members of the undead who'd just said the words Beetlejuice, well, technically Beetlejuice, but let's not split hairs, 3 times in a row, they'd summoned the lovable, demonic SOB himself to cause some mayhem and possibly even murder on their behalf. Lutzko and Brightman were a little skeptical at first, being hardened ex-cons who'd both been murdered by monsters because of the good guys. But when Beetlejuice explained his services, punishing and tormenting the living on behalf of the dead, they became very interested in making a deal with him.
Wow, you're telling me we got a whole building of pencil-necked paranormal peons complete with anti-ghost gizmos and doodads, plus a whole host of monsters that are not afraid to set on people and ex-people?
Beetlejuice said, stroking a long beard that he didn't have.
And you want me to haunt the living hell out of these geeks till they regret the crap they put you through, and or die so you can settle the score yourselves? Then I think you fine upstanding folks are gonna love my deluxe package.
Yes, he did grab his groin for emphasis with an audible honk honk when he said that part about his package. Beetlejuice was many things: a professional poltergeist, a man and a womanizer, and a cum laude graduate of Juilliard. But classy wasn't among them. This contract would be a little more demanding than scaring an arty couple out of a rustic house or giving a Girl Scout a heart attack on the doorstep. But BJ had always liked a challenge.
It's showtime!
His campaign of terror began in the Foundation canteen. It was chicken pot pie day for all the staff of Site-19, a bright spot in an otherwise distressing work environment, and a certain bio-exorcist was about to ruin it. As the various researchers and guards took their seats, ready to make workplace banter and enjoy their fresh hot pies, a ghostly wailing pervaded the room. Everyone looked up around the room. Was this the result of some anomaly they'd already cataloged? But while they were busy contemplating, skeletal hands reached out of the pies in geysers of black ooze and grabbed their would-be enjoyers around their throats. As they struggled against the homicidal pastries, a flock of vampire bats entered the room, swooping in and attacking anyone who hadn't picked up a pie yet. They could only hope they were all up to date on their rabies shots. But one of Beetlejuice's other skills was multitasking. On a canvas the size of Site-19, he could unveil some true large-scale artistry, like an evil supernatural Banksy. Next, he felt like causing some trouble in the archives. Something about the Dewey Decimal System had always rubbed him the wrong way. Archive Sims had spent all day among the filing cabinets, taking old Foundation memos written in pre-computer days and digitizing them for later use. It was perhaps the most boring and tedious work physically imaginable, and Sims loved every minute of it. It was quiet, peaceful, and there was nobody there to bother him. Until now. Archivist Sims was jarred from the classical music playing on his personal radio when a drawer in one of the filing cabinets seemed to open by itself. He trundled over and closed it again, only to see another one open nearby. And another, and another, and another. One of the rapidly opening drawers hit him in the shin. Another caught the side of his face and would probably leave a bruise. Soon enough, so many drawers had opened around Archivist Sims that he was trapped between them. And that's when the tarantulas started crawling out of them. As Archivist Sims screamed, the spiders crawled over his sweater vest. The radio switched from the soothing sounds of Chopin to the grating butt-rock sounds of Nickelback.
No! Make it stop, please!
Archivist Sims screamed. And because Archivist Sims asked so nicely, it did. The tarantulas were gone, the drawers were all closed, and the throaty vocals of Chad Kroger were replaced by the soothing notes of Chopin once again. Sims breathed a sigh of relief. It must have been another one of his little psychotic breaks. No biggie, he'd just start taking his medication again. But he'd worry about that later. He had a job to do now. Sims removed a piece of paper from one of the filing cabinets and prepared to properly refile it when he noticed something horrible. The text on the page. It was all in wingdings. No, this had to be some kind of mistake. Sims checked another file. Wingdings again. He checked every file he could, frantically pulling them out of drawers. Wingdings, wingdings, wingdings. The entire archive that he'd spent his life organizing was ruined.
No!
Archivist Sims screamed, "Bring back the tarantulas!" And BJ was just getting started. He unlocked 682's containment cell and let it rampage through half of the facility. He put dead raccoons in all of the air conditioners, making the place stink to high heaven. He even sent a mass email around half of the computer terminals that claimed to be an important Foundation orientation video, but were actually compromising photos of members of the O5 Council in various states of undress. How he got these photos is still a mystery. While pandemonium broke out all across the facility, Beetlejuice was preparing an equally nasty prank in Rec Room C, where Dr. Gears and Dr. Clef had both brewed large cups of coffee and were reclining on one of the couches. As the duo of senior researchers chatted, Dr. Gears took a long swig of his mocha, only to immediately spit it onto the ground. There was a live cockroach writhing in the brown puddle, one that a few seconds ago had been in the researcher's mouth. Dr. Clef, jerk that he is, laughed. "I told you put too much sugar in your coffee, Charles." But it was his turn now. The couch under them suddenly started bucking like a bronco, or like the bed in Beetlejuice's favorite feel-good comedy, The Exorcist. Both researchers were thrown off, their coffee mugs shattering against the ground, usual suspects style. They turned and looked at the couch. If Dr. Clef had his favorite pump action, he probably would have filled it with buckshot by now. But Clef had been forbidden from taking firearms into the rec room since the incident. Instead, all they could do was watch as the upholstery ripped and an immense, slithering creature emerged. It was a snake, a massive, rubbery snake, with a grinning face of a certain bio-exorcist.
"What, you didn't make a cup for me?"
He snarled.
"I can see why Brightman and Lutzko can't stand you guys. You're so freaking inconsiderate."
Dr. Gears reached into his lab coat to grab his Foundation communicator and call for help, but the Beetlejuice snake slapped him in the face with its mighty tail, knocking him across the room and hitting his head into the wall. Clef was frozen in horror. Like Indiana Jones, he was typically a courageous maverick who feared almost nothing. But also, like Indiana Jones, his one exception was snakes. Dr. Clef really hated snakes. The Beetlejuice snake slithered and coiled around Clef, squeezing until he felt the pressure on his bones. If the fear wasn't going to make him pass out soon enough, the oxygen deprivation would do the job for him.
"What kind of name is Alto anyway?"
Beetlejuice asked.
"Guess I really don't have room to criticize you there, actually, so I'm just gonna kill you instead."
But before Beetlejuice could fulfill that promise, the door to the rec room was kicked open, and members of MTF Mu-13, also known as the Ghostbusters, burst into the room. They yelled for Beetlejuice to freeze, aiming their thaumaturgically enhanced assault rifles. The poltergeist rolled his eyes and returned to his humanoid form, striped suit and all.
"You Foundation geeks sure know how to roll out the welcome wagon, huh? An edible arrangement and a card would have been fine. You didn't need to send everybody out."
The Ghostbusters weren't impressed. They raised their weapons and prepared to fire, when Beetlejuice snapped his dirty fingers. Suddenly, the mobile task force were all dressed like clowns, and their assault rifles had become balloon animals tied into the shapes of guns. Beetlejuice laughed and disappeared out of the room, leaving everyone there thoroughly humiliated. Clef and Gears rose to their feet, trying to regain their footing and their pride. Gears couldn't help but notice something the irritating demon had said. "I can see why Brightman and Lutzko can't stand you guys." Gears recognized those names. They were two D-classes who'd recently died in experiments. Thanks to SCP-4973, there was already documented evidence of the consciousnesses of dead D-class personnel persisting into the afterlife. But the idea of them colluding with an even more powerful and dangerous supernatural entities was unprecedented. Beetlejuice had all the makings of a chaotic Keter class. They needed to marshal their forces before things got any more out of hand. But it may have already been too late on that front. Beetlejuice was busy being a menace in the halls. He'd somehow manifested a working roller coaster with tracks threaded through the building, which he'd nicknamed Mr. Bone Stripper, as a reference to his other favorite movie, the underrated 1991 Dan Aykroyd classic, Nothing But Trouble. The ride was so fast and frightening that it literally scared the skin off of the Foundation staff riding it, reducing them to dead skeletons. We added the qualifier dead there, because Beetlejuice had also summoned plenty of living skeletons that were chasing researchers and guards around the building. The deluxe haunting package really didn't mess around, and Brightman and Lutzko were truly getting some bang for their spectral buck on this one. The juice was loose, and another group of armed guards ran in to intercept him, pistols and shotguns at the ready.
How quaint.
Beetlejuice extended his arm, his clenched fist becoming a huge and cartoonish hammer. With one strike, the entire team was smashed through the ground, leaving outlines of their bodies in the floor. This was the most fun that he had had in centuries, and none of these clowns knew that he could be banished again if any of them said his name another 3 times. That, however, didn't mean that Dr. Gears wasn't planning a counteroffensive, though Dr. Clef had requested to sit this one out, because he really didn't feel up to having another snake encounter today. Following the supernatural phenomena through the halls on the security cameras, Gears could see that Beetlejuice was heading straight towards Containment Block C. Then that's where he would spring his trap. Back in the halls, Beetlejuice was still basking in the chaos. He was trapping people inside broom closets and letting off fireworks with them inside.
Classic.
That's when he heard the familiar voice of Dr. Gears down the hall, standing in an adjoining room.
I only take one 15-minute break per day, he said. I don't appreciate you ruining my coffee during that time.
Now that was funny. Gears thought a bug in his coffee and a minor concussion was Beetlejuice's idea of ruining someone's day. That was almost an invitation. The demented ghoul laughed and swooped in, summoning up his power for one perfectly nasty piece de resistance, when he was suddenly frozen by the Scranton reality anchors that had been hidden around the room where Dr. Gears was standing. The Foundation's most straight-laced researcher was not above using himself as live bait. A few weeks later, Beetlejuice sat in the center of his incorporeal entity vacuum chamber, surrounded by Harrington hollow neutralizer wards bouncing a little rubber ball he'd manifested against the wall. He'd been carving tally marks for the days he'd been here into the concrete with his long, dirty fingernails. Occasionally, he'd even play old prison tunes on a little harmonica, while contemplating plans for his next escape attempt. He certainly knew how to keep those Foundation stooges on their toes.
But hey,
He thought,
things could be worse.
3 hots and a cot, and a limitless supply of guys who'd take themselves way too seriously that he could annoy whenever he got bored.
Beats the hell out of Jupiter,
he muttered. The damaged vessel careened across the sky, a streak of flame following it in its wake, marking its path down towards the surface. If a human being had witnessed it on that cold, unfamiliar world, they might have assumed it wasn't even a spacecraft. It looked more like a projectile, a missile hurtling towards its target, the first act of war. But there wasn't anyone on the surface looking up, no one human, at least. From above, the surface of the planet seemed to be constantly shifting, the low light from the planet's nearly permanent night cycle making it seem like there was nothing below but a vast, dark ocean. But the movement wasn't being made by waves. It was alive. A swarm piled on top of each other, their chitinous carapaces covered in slime. They saw, through eyeless faces, the burning ship as it raced across the dark sky of their homeworld, and this craft was bringing a new threat to the Hive. It might as well have been an act of war, except this wasn't the first shot fired. This was no attack. It was an execution, one that had been centuries in the making. As the ship came crashing to the surface, a huge fireball erupted, driving the creatures from the area. They quickly surrounded the wreckage, snarling, hissing, mouths quivering as drool spilled from their jaws, tails raised and poised to strike, keeping watch, waiting, while inside the shipwreck, a containment pod had been broken on impact. Acid that had been used to keep the creature on board trapped in stasis was now spilling into the hull, eating away at the wreck from within, and allowing SCP-682 to clamber free from its cage. The SCP Foundation's long, storied, and largely unsuccessful efforts to kill SCP-682 are well documented. Their archives are filled with case after case of attempts that hadn't left so much as a scratch on the crocodilian creature's scaly hide, and plenty more that had resulted in the deaths of countless Foundation personnel. By the year 2150, the hard-to-destroy reptile was no closer to being dead, and instead had been kept confined in its containment chamber, the vat of acid slowly corroding through its skin at the same speed as its regenerative healing could repair the damage. By this time, Earth as we knew it had seen better days, and the Foundation was growing increasingly aware that the planet would not last much longer. They had contingencies in place, of course, as they always had when the threat of world-ending catastrophes loomed. But there was a problem that even the Foundation could not have foreseen. The higher-ups began to notice a decrease in their personnel numbers, not unexpected given the dangers of working directly with anomalies. However, their intake of new employees wasn't enough to compensate for the number of workplace accidents and occupational hazards that came with working for the Foundation. In fact, as humanity began leaving Earth in droves, traveling out to newly discovered worlds far beyond our own solar system to terraform and colonize them, the SCP Foundation was drawing from a pool of new recruits that was growing ever smaller. The well was drying up. The population still left on Earth were dwindling as they succumbed to the effects of a ravaged environment. Without people, there could be no Foundation, and as the human race departed from their home, it seemed the SCP Foundation was destined to be left behind, forgotten, until the company came along. The Foundation's lifeline came in the form of a partnership with a multinational conglomerate, the same company that had been responsible for the huge push towards otherworldly terraforming. Their goal was, officially, to provide humanity with new, safer planets to live, where they could prosper and thrive. Their name was Weyland-Yutani, and they were building better worlds. Unofficially though, Weyland-Yutani's goals extended far beyond constructing ships for deep space transport and interplanetary colonization. They had another, more sinister agenda, one set out by their earliest founders as far back as 2099, possibly even further, and it just so happened that it was these more nefarious goals that made merging with the SCP Foundation a necessary part of their plans. Contracts were drawn up and signed, acquisitions agreed upon, handshaken between the O5 Council and Weyland-Yutani's Board of Directors. The company would help migrate the SCP Foundation, all of their assets, personnel, and contained anomalies from Earth to new planets across the stars. In return, the Foundation was to offer up their researchers and anomalous experts to assist in Weyland-Yutani's pet project, researching and procuring what they referred to as xenomorphs. A group of the Foundation's brightest docked at a research outpost, the Renaissance, divided into two sections, the Romulus and Remus. The researchers were presented with the remains of a creature, the likes of which not even the SCP Foundation had ever encountered. It was a tall, lithe, biomechanical nightmare, capable of moving on all fours or walking bipedally. The Weyland-Yutani experts informed the Foundation researchers that these xenomorphs had strength far beyond that of a human, able to break through welded metal and vents with little to no effort. Their claws could tear a human body apart. Within their mouths, behind razor-sharp teeth, was a second pharyngeal jaw that could pierce through bone and metal alike. They were fiercely intelligent, predatory creatures, capable of hunting and adapting to their environment with remarkable ease. Their structural perfection was matched only by their hostility. The specimen was the perfect organism, and the Foundation researchers realized the perfect way to solve their long-standing reptile problem. While the specialists aboard the Renaissance explained the creature's life cycle, gestating in a human host thanks to a parasitic facehugger, an important detail of the xenomorph's biology stuck out to Foundation researchers. Their blood was a highly potent and corrosive molecular acid, capable of eating through almost any man-made or organic matter in a matter of minutes. While it may have acted as a defense mechanism for the xenomorphs, killing or mortally wounding anything that caused it harm, the Foundation quickly realized that this could easily be turned to their advantage. If they were able to securely transport SCP-682 to a location with a live xenomorph subject, the hard-to-destroy reptile's natural hatred towards all living things, and the aliens' hostility, would have no doubt ended in a confrontation. Even if SCP-682 was able to kill its alien adversary, the xenomorph's acid blood was strong enough to potentially dissolve the reptile in retaliation, ending it for good. There was just one hiccup to the plan. One xenomorph would not be enough. In order to prevent SCP-682's regenerative healing abilities adapting to the specific chemical composition of the alien blood, it would need to be exposed to vast quantities at once, which meant finding the xenomorph homeworld. Decades of research and development from both the Foundation and Weyland-Yutani went into the project. Nobody knew where the xenomorphs came from. making tracking down their point of origin like searching for a needle in a haystack as vast as the furthest reaches of unexplored space. For years, the company had been trying to study the aliens, only to be thwarted at every turn. Every time their military assets, the Colonial Marines, encountered a new hive of xenomorphs, discovering their origin seemed like it was just assured, only to learn that each new world where they encountered them was actually just another infestation, not where they'd come from. But the Foundation were not slouches when it came to anomalous research. While Weyland-Yutani was content studying the aliens, gathering what they could from salvaged remains and unruly specimens, the Foundation had no qualms about harnessing the xenomorphs, especially if it would lead to the eventual death of SCP-682. Using their expertise, the SCP Foundation was not only able to capture and pacify a live xenomorph, but developed a piece of proprietary technology that could monitor and interpret its thought patterns. This allowed them to tap into the hive mind shared by the xenomorphs, following it like a trail of breadcrumbs all the way back home. The xenomorph specimen was used essentially as a navigational device, the readings taken from it fed into the autopilot of a ship, the USCSS Kurtz. Then the Foundation moved SCP-682 on board, seething within its containment chamber, having been stuck in an endless cycle of acidic corrosion and regenerative healing for centuries at this point. The Kurtz took flight, homing in on a planet out in the furthest reaches of uncharted space. The planetoid it was heading towards had never been seen by human eyes, only ever rumored to have existed. The Kurtz approached, ejecting an observation probe to wait in orbit before the vessel began to burn up as it entered the atmosphere. 682 tore through the hull of the crashed ship, roaring as it burst free. It could feel the life teeming around it, hundreds of thousands of creatures. The amassed horde of xenomorphs matched its roars, hissing at the reptilian intruder on their planet. They started spilling down the edges of the crater, racing towards 682 with unmatched ferocity, the hive's drones and warriors clambering over each other in an all-out attack. The hard-to-destroy reptile swiped its tail, cleaving through the first line of xenomorphs to reach it, whipping at them with so much speed that its tail effortlessly cleaved them into pieces from the sheer force alone. Acid blood sprayed out across the other xenomorphs, splattering ineffectively against their slick black carapaces. Their blood did not corrode their own bodies, their biomechanical exoskeletons and insides naturally resilient. The same could not be said for SCP-682. The reptile howled in rage as its tail recoiled, hissing as the molecular acid ate through its hide with such intensity that its scales started smoking. The xenomorphs surrounded it slowly, patiently, wild animals stalking their prey. They observed the reptile. Their pauses almost seemed like mocking. SCP-682 was enraged, both at the pain and at the silent goading from the amassed horde of nightmares around it. But they weren't mocking the creature. They were learning, observing how their acid blood continued to burn through its tail until the appendage fell off and landed on the ground with a dull thud, still being dissolved by the corrosive blood. Wordlessly, the xenomorphs communicated with each other, their shared hive mind giving them one shared singular command: attack. The hive pounced, piling onto SCP-682, their jaws shooting out to bite, not at the reptile's hide, but at each other. The xenomorphs had learned that the only effective weapon they had against SCP-682 was their own blood, and they were prepared to spill it. The pile of xenomorphs wasted no time sacrificing more and more of their own number, each death pouring a new dose of molecular acid onto the hard-to-destroy reptile buried beneath them. SCP-682 roared, lashing out at the aliens swarming on top of it, killing several with swipes of its claws, only to be met by their acidic defense mechanism. Every time SCP-682 managed to heal, more piled on top. Days turned into weeks, and still the stalemate dragged on. The xenomorphs reproduced with terrifying efficiency, filling the crater with fresh forces faster than SCP-682 could adapt to kill them all. Meanwhile, SCP-682's regeneration kept it from succumbing to the acid, even as its scales burned and smoked, turning the battleground into a nightmarish pit of searing flesh and hissing blood. The Foundation's researchers watched the feed sent back from their probe, equal parts fascinated and horrified. They had expected SCP-682 to adapt, as it always did, but they hadn't predicted this. A twisted, endless stalemate between two of the most hostile life forms in the known universe. For now, the two were locked in a vicious cycle, each countering the other's strengths and weaknesses, but even from the safety of their observation room, a single unsettling thought echoed in the minds of every researcher. What if this stalemate breaks? If one side finally wins, whether the relentless hatred of SCP-682 or the mindless reproduction of the xenomorph hive, what could that mean for us? The Foundation had only barely contained these two titans, but in the end, could humanity survive the fury of either victor? Only time could tell. Son Goku's boots dug into the ground as he was guarded with both arms against a heavy blow from SCP-2800, Cactus Man. The power behind the superhero's strike was lacking, but a few of the spiky cactus needles that lined SCP-2800's fists became lodged right in Goku's armbands. A few even pierced the outer level of his skin, dealing a tiny amount of chip damage to the Saiyan warrior. Goku returned the favor with a punch of his own, sending Cactus Man bouncing across the floor of the specially designed SCP Foundation arena that he had been invited to. Though it was only a single punch, Cactus Man struggled to rise to his feet. Goku waited only a mere moment for his opponent to recover. Like a good sport, he pulled a long needle out of his hand, which had been implanted during the punch, and threw it aside. Goku then resumed his fighting stance, countering Cactus Man's approach with a hard kick to the SCP's side. A few more needles got caught in the fabric of his martial arts uniform, but the anomaly they were once attached to went flying through the air and collided with the wall. Crunch. The metal barriers on the side of the arena bent and in some places broke. An indentation, at least 2 feet deep, was left in the reinforced facility wall from the impact, and Cactus Man was battered and beaten within the depth of it. Cactus Man did not stand up again. The Foundation researchers had expected as much, and were already sending in Goku's next opponent, SCP-082, Ferdinand the Cannibal. The erudite and muscular humanoid bantered with Goku even as he bared down on the Saiyan. Goku both dodged Ferdinand's swings and kept up the conversation with little effort spared to each activity. A sudden gut punch from Goku caused Ferdinand to double over. The Saiyan proceeded to pummel Ferdinand with a rapid-fire series of blows, astonishing the researchers with his speed. Ferdinand may have been slow, but its much wider reach allowed the cannibal a tiny window of opportunity to seize and hold Goku against himself in a crushing bear hug. The grapple worked for a millisecond, pressing some of Cactus Man's leftover spikes deeper into Son Goku's lower leg. Goku then demonstrated his own strength and simply flexed his way out of SCP-082's vice grip. A lightning-fast dual palm strike from Goku pushed the heavyweight behemoth frame of Ferdinand the Cannibal back several feet, leaving the Euclid-class monster winded. Goku cracked both of his shoulders in a fighting warm-up, then wound up for a big haymaker punch, which he zipped forward and executed as if he had already been standing at point B. Ferdinand was as big as they come, so naturally when he fell to the arena floor, he fell rather hard. Goku danced on his feet like a boxer, expecting more of a challenge from SCP-082, but the massive mountain of sinew was down for the count already. A solitary D-Class entered the arena and approached Goku without any fighting stance to speak of. The D-Class made the appropriate hand motions to initiate a rock-paper-scissors match, which Goku, ever appreciating a new challenge, began to mimic as this new duel began. This was in fact a game of SCP-4633, aka Rock, Paper, Yogg, Sothoth. In the first round of the best of 5, the D-Class threw paper, while Goku threw rock. In the next round, the D-Class threw an anomalous gesture, which reshaped his own hand into a terrifying array of lamprey mouths, which began to fire sharp teeth at Goku like an organic machine gun. Undaunted, Goku threw the scissors gesture as he weaved and evaded the entire hailstorm of lamprey fangs. Horrific cracking and sputtering sounds echoed across the arena as the D-Class melted into a puddle of protoplasmic sea foam before regenerating into a giant human-sized hand composed of coral and crustacean parts. The enormous appendage began to shake and rumble, preparing to throw another gesture as the game continued. Goku's arm was affected by SCP-4633, transforming into a limp tentacle as the Saiyan threw one of the anomalous gestures that were permitted within the altered rules of the game. One of his fists was now sealed off from use, but that didn't stop Goku from slapping his new mollusk-style arm against the transfigured D-Class. As the research team expected, the Saiyan's striking power was now somewhat limited. He had suffered a permanent debuff to one arm, and as a result, the huge hand that was now Goku's opponent was not done yet. The subnautical D-Class hand beast threw another eldritch and unknowable gesture, becoming a mound of anemones and tendrils topped by the head of Cthulhu. Goku countered with rock, or at least what began as rock, as his other hand was distorted from a regular closed fist to a barely opposable clump of brain coral. His blow nonetheless obliterated the D-Class into Flotsam and Jetsam, but the second debuff had been inflicted. Several instances of SCP-2419, the Laughing Men, were sent into the arena by the research team, with one tentacle arm and one coral arm. Goku fended off the highly durable and wickedly evil former D-Class personnel with some difficulty. The instances swarmed around Goku like a football team dogpiling a downed runner, forcing the Saiyan to activate his Kaioken aura and launch the immortal enemies back in an explosion of flying bodies. Goku repeated his Kaioken technique, stacking on an increase to damage before going hog wild on the Laughing Men. His transmuted limbs bashed and slapped all over the Laughing Men with more than enough force to make up for their odd shape. His kicks were just as powerful as ever, and he sent many instances of SCP-2419 spinning away with snipping strikes to their necks and collarbone areas. The force of his current aura alone was enough to shield him from the brunt of the Laughing Men's blows, and he soon battered and broke the instances to their limits of their invulnerability. SCP-106 was introduced to the containment arena, descending upon Goku in an opening left by the Laughing Men. The Kaioken aura hindered the progress of the old man's phasing corrosion, but not enough to prevent internal damage from the incorporeal being's touch. Goku tried trading blows with SCP-106, but 106's phasic properties meant that all martial arts-based striking attacks would be ineffective and cause further damage to Goku himself. The corrosion rotted Goku's already mangled sea creature limbs and began to infect his very organs. Adding insult to injury, SCP-106 pulled Son Goku into its pocket dimension, putting the Saiyan at a huge disadvantage. The old man spawned copies of itself within the realm, which all gathered around Goku and continued to corrode his body. Try as he might, Goku could still not deal any physical damage to SCP-106. He cupped his hands together and began to focus his chi to a single spot at which the palms met. Aura surged around him as he strained and shouted, his power level skyrocketing. Ka-me-ha-me-ha! Light poured forth from the Saiyan warrior's hands as he unleashed his most famous technique. A destructive beam erupted from Goku and tore through the many duplicates of SCP-106 until it reached the limits of the pocket dimension. The Kamehameha then spread across the nightmarish darkness until the dimension along with SCP-106 itself was completely destroyed. Goku reappeared in the SCP Foundation containment arena, covered in black goop and bruises from where the various copies of SCP-106 had damaged him. Mobile Task Force Epsilon-11, Nine-Tailed Fox, stormed in with guns blazing. Every agent in the firing line let loose a deluge of high-powered bullets into the now weakened Son Goku. The bullets were now designed to burrow an inch beneath the skin and explode, but only a few could even penetrate the shimmering curtain of aura that now surrounded Goku. Goku yelled and increased the density of his chi, causing his hair to spike up as energy flowed into it. He achieved Super Saiyan form. The bullets of the MTF agents now melted in mid-air before reaching him. In a ferocious display of bloodlust, Goku ripped through the entirety of Epsilon-11 like they were made of tissue paper. His punches now sent agents hurling straight through the walls, if they were lucky. Some just exploded into red mist on the spot. Kapow! Slam! Bam! A second wave of Nine-Tailed Fox operatives moved in with a ceaseless barrage of rapid fire. The bullets might as well have not been there, because Goku was now serious about wrecking the Foundation's day. His arms were still twisted into SCP-4633 gestures, and his organs had been partially corroded by SCP-106, but Super Saiyan Goku was going strong as he brutally beat down the remainder of MTF Epsilon 11. The fury of this fight had begun to compromise the arena. Explosions of aura from Goku's body were breaking the walls and floor without him even trying to do so. Foundation staff screamed and panicked, even as they sent in the next mobile task force to oppose Super Saiyan Goku. 4 immortal cyborgs from Mobile Task Force Tau 5, Samsara, each of them leagues stronger than the Laughing Men, dropped onto the stage and started hacky-sacking Super Saiyan Goku around with powerful godlike blows. Now, facing real opponents, Goku regained his posture and caught one of the cyborg's fists in mid-strike. He hit back with all his might, and the Samsara agent flipped through the air, landing several feet away. Goku tapped his forehead to use instant transmission, teleporting behind the cyborgs to hit from their blind spots. The Super Saiyan hammered one of the Tau 5 agents with so many blows that its metal body crumpled up like a tin can run over by a train. He dispatched the next one with a skyward Kamehameha that blew the roof off the entire facility. The 2 surviving Samsara members tackled Goku, grabbing onto the Saiyan with an iron grip 100 times tighter than Ferdinand's. Goku flew straight up into the sky, above the clouds, taking the 2 cyborgs with him. The power of the sun rejuvenated his chi, and he flexed his Super Saiyan muscles, flinging the 2 Samsara members off of him in different directions. Like a meteor, Goku descended back down towards the facility, and landed with enough force to completely demolish the building and the arena. Super Saiyan Goku now stood in a barren wasteland, awaiting his opponents. Both Samsara cyborgs hit the ground and stood back up, shaking off the atmospheric fall damage as they rushed Goku again. He was simply too strong for them to contain now, and he drove them both into the earth with his fists. Out of the wreckage of the SCP Foundation facility came the most powerful brothers, SCP-076-2 Abel and SCP-073 Cain. Abel went after Goku first, leaving Cain to stand by for an opening. Abel summoned a black greatsword from thin air and swung it down on Goku, who deflected it with his Super Saiyan fists. Abel sneered, and a black box of metal manifested around Goku's body. Blades of all shapes and sizes appeared in the surrounding area and shot through the box with alarming speed and power. Whoosh! Another surge of aura. Goku burst free of Abel's trap, looking only slightly more wounded than he was before. He rocketed towards Abel, who had already manifested a jet-black anti-tank rifle on the ground. It fired with a dramatic pulse, and its explosive projectile hit Goku at center mass. The Super Saiyan emerged from the smoke and slammed his fists into 076-2, right as Abel manifested a 3-layered metal shield to guard his body. Even with that protection, the punch sent Abel hurtling towards a pile of rubble. Goku used instant transmission to catch up with Abel in mid-flight, karate chopping the anomalous warrior into the ground and causing an enormous crater to form from the impact. Abel raised a trembling hand, struggling to manifest another weapon before falling limp. It was in his hated brother's hands now. 076-2's body discorporeated into shadows, returning to the respawn point of SCP-076. Cain walked towards Goku and spread his arms out, welcoming a challenge. Goku whacked Cain in the jaw with a hard strike and immediately flew back as the force of his own punch recoiled on him. Cain's eyes rolled back in his head from the pain, but he stood there, sturdy and strong as he could make himself. Goku didn't understand Cain's anomalous ability to reflect damage and decided to ram SCP-073 with full force. The impact rattled Goku's entire body, and once again he was flung to the ground, having been heavily injured by his own Super Saiyan power. Cain dropped to his knee, crying and wailing as insane levels of pain shot through his entire body. Goku took this as a sign that he was winning despite his own sorry state, and prepared to unleash a fearsome spirit bomb onto Cain. He gathered energy in the air above him, pulling vast amounts of chi from living animals all over the world until the sphere over his head reached its full size. Goku dropped the critical mass of fighting spirit onto Kane, who immediately went effectively comatose from feeling that much pressure all at once. A second later, those would-be injuries transferred to Goku, and his entire body was devastated by waves of his own spirit bomb attack. Goku's back hit the ground for the first time in this entire series of opponents. With mutated limbs, corroded internal structures, various cuts and scrapes from all the hits that the others had dealt to him over the course of this long battle, and now damage from several of his very own attacks, the Super Saiyan legend was looking worse for wear. Nonetheless, Goku caught his breath and rose to his feet. He patted some of the dust of his tattered uniform and stared out at the ruined facility where the arena was. As he looked, he saw a face, SCP-096's face. The Shy Guy came bounding across the landscape towards the injured, barely standing Goku and dove upon him with great sound and fury. The Super Saiyan would have been more than a match for the Shy Guy if he entered the fight fresh, but in his broken state, 096 was now a serious threat. Goku's hair turned blue and he activated his Ultra Instinct technique. He could see all of the Shy Guy's attacks coming now, and could dodge and counter with perfect timing. But each blow dealt to the Shy Guy was rejuvenated immediately, and there was no slowing down the horrible creature. Super Saiyan Blue Goku unleashed his signature technique again, devastating miles of outer space behind the Shy Guy as he poured most of his remaining chi into it. The earth sizzled with the scorching aftereffects of Goku's attack. It still wasn't enough to stop the Shy Guy for more than a couple of seconds. Goku caught his breath just as the Shy Guy hit him in the stomach hard enough to take it away. Goku regretted not brushing up on his Haikai destruction techniques before accepting the Foundation's challenge. The gap between SCP-096's capabilities and his own was closing rapidly, and apart from teleporting away from the fight, he was out of options on how to win this. The punches, kicks, biffs, and bops continued to be thrown out by both combatants until a decisive blow smacked into Goku's face. The Saiyan was down for the count. Nearby, Vegeta flew into sight of the destroyed facility, his own Super Saiyan hair glowing bright.
I've got next!
Smoke rises high above Site-19 as the best and brightest of the SCP Foundation try in vain to contain the chaos unfolding in their flagship containment facility. Guards and mobile task force operatives bust out the heavy artillery to face off against the rampaging Doombots, humanoid machines fitted with advanced armor, laser weaponry, and even rocket propulsion. Some of the deadliest anomalies, from SCP-682 to SCP-106, have escaped and are prowling through the halls looking for prey. Members of the shadowy O5 Council, positioned across the globe with one orbiting the Earth in their own private space station, begin to panic. They need to hunker down. All evidence points to the frightening fact that if Site-19 falls, their locations will be compromised, and whoever is doing this will be after them next. It will mean the complete destruction of the SCP Foundation as we know it. If the Site-19 domino falls, it could be over there and then. A salvo of rockets descend upon the exterior of the site, lighting up the outer defense systems. Ground-launched mission defense systems are somehow bypassed, shut down by the technical know-how of some beyond-genius hacker. Fences and perimeter walls are destroyed. Guards' towers collapse as sniper fire from the desert take out the guards. In the vast desert surrounding Site-19, a mirage shimmers. But this is more than a mirage. The air wobbles and out from the distortion steps an army, armed with explosives, melee weapons, and advanced lasers. Their chests bear the logo of the nation of Latveria. Each one advanced with a fervor of furious zealotry. They're willing to kill and die for their master, and if everything goes to plan, they will be planting the same flag they now fly over this building by nightfall. As their robotic brethren and the same anomalies that the Foundation vowed to contain destroyed the organization from within. Who could possibly be behind such a daring attack? Who could operate both beneath and above Foundation suspicion, crafting a meticulous plan to strike at their weakest and potentially even take an advantage over the most powerful organization in human history? It could only be Victor Von Doom, or Dr. Doom if you're feeling formal. Genius inventor, combatant, and sorcerer, dictator of the Eastern European nation of Latveria, and one of the most powerful and terrifying supervillains of all time. If they wanted to have any hope of repelling this attack, the SCP Foundation had their work cut out for them for once. But before the chaos before the assault on Site-19 that could potentially turn the tide of Dr. Doom's war against the Foundation, before he even created or set his plan into motion, how did Dr. Doom and the Foundation find themselves at each other's throats? It began, as many of Dr. Doom's diabolical plans do, with one of his jaunts through time. Thanks to a fusion of arcane sorcery and impossibly sophisticated technology, Doom had long since cracked the secrets to temporal manipulation and even interdimensional travel. He could theoretically go anywhere and any when that he pleased, so he liked to satisfy his megalomania by keeping an eye on the future. And on one trip into the future, Dr. Doom did not like what he saw. In the future he arrived into, the world was a scorched and nightmarish hellscape. Human beings were no longer the dominant force on the planet. Many billions had been wiped out, and what remains labored in agony under the rule of a demonic crimson tyrant, the Scarlet King. The only remaining culture was that of the Davites, monstrous people advanced as they were barbaric. Acts of murder, human sacrifice, and cannibalism take place in the center of their blood-stained cityscapes, and outside of these cities, where the Scarlet King is worshipped as a god, terrible monsters hunt human prey. Doom is aghast behind the cold, neutral expression of his mask. Who could have allowed this to happen? Dr. Doom quickly left this ruined hellscape of a timeline and set about his new project, finding out what exactly led to such a horrible fate befalling the world, and what he'd need to do in order to stop it. You might find it confusing. Why would Dr. Doom, a practitioner of black magic, a tyrant and a proud supervillain himself, hold any stock in saving the world from the future that he'd seen? Simple. For Doom to rule the world, there needed to still be a world to rule. He didn't want the wanton destruction and death you'd find under the bloody fist of a chaos god. The structured order and control of a totalitarian was far more his style. While locked away in his fortress in the capital of Latveria, Dr. Doom and his network of agents across the globe began to discover some fascinating things. There was an organization, operating in absolute secrecy, working under the stated goal of securing, containing, and protecting anomalous entities, objects, locations, and general phenomena. They served under the mysterious auspices of the O5 Council, a group of 13 individuals scattered across the globe. With the ultimate cache of anomalies in their clutches, it could be argued that they were the most powerful people on Earth, a fact that Dr. Doom found fascinating. They styled themselves as Earth's protectors, but their arrogance would lead to its destruction. Poor decisions, weakness. Clearly, even with all that power, they couldn't be trusted. The human race would be better off with the power of the SCP Foundation in the titanium clutches of Victor Von Doom. And so began his grand plan to shift the balance of power in the anomalous world. But even though Dr. Doom was supremely confident in his resources and abilities, he wasn't a fool. He knew that this foundation was packing incredible power, from their vast stocks of anomalies to technology far more advanced than most of the human race had access to. In fact, it was a game of cat and mouse now. If Doom overplayed his hand, then the Foundation could easily open a file on him and begin mounting countermaneuvers against his forces. He didn't fancy spending the rest of his life separated from his armor, locked in a cell surrounded by Scranton reality anchors and thaumaturgic seals. His empire destroyed, his assets liquidated, his most loyal lieutenants either killed, contained, or mind-wiped with amnestic treatment. As much as he was aware of his own strength, that was a possibility he could not risk. The first step of his plan was simple. He needed people on the inside. From Doom's research, he found that the Foundation had an incredibly strenuous vetting process for all new applicants. It could take him years to create the perfect candidate, give them a foolproof background that would pass the Foundation's smell test, but without the liberty of time, seeing as an apocalypse was on the way, he needed to try an alternative. The trap was laid in Serbia, where Doom's Latvian agents were deeply embedded in stay-behind operations after the Yugoslav wars. Using some of Doom's thaumaturgic technology, they created the most classical of supernatural creatures: zombies, shambling flesh-eaters terrorizing remote Serbian villagers. A few innocents died, of course, but Doom had never really been averse to collateral damage in his schemes. It wasn't long before a Foundation field agent was dispatched to look into the case, setting the next stage of Doom's plan into motion. The agent was zip-tied and black-bagged, then teleported back to Doom's inner sanctum in Latveria. They only had a few-hour window to get this right before the Foundation started to suspect. Doom once again reapplied his scientific and occult genius. He had his mother's genes to thank for that, to create a perfect clone of the agent he'd kidnapped, complete with all of the latter's memories, and one key difference: a hidden but absolute loyalty to the will of Doom. With the agent remaining unconscious in one of Doom's many dungeons, the flawless switcheroo was made. The clone was placed back in Serbia to report back to the Foundation, and a wider team of mobile task force agents were deployed to easily mop up the zombie menace. Little did they know, when they returned to Site-19, they were bringing back an agent of Doom with them, and it would not be the only one. Over the month that followed, Doom would perform this same scheme with several low-level Foundation field agents, the kind that flew under the radar amongst the many larger fish that the Foundation had to fry. At night, they would send in detailed reports, feeding their metal-suited master intel about the organization. Little by little, he and his strategists were able to build up a detailed picture of the Foundation, and especially Site-19 from the inside. But if Doom wanted to truly rule over this group, he needed to behead the snake and install his own power structure in their place. He needed to subjugate or destroy the ones who held all the power of the SCP Foundation, the O5 Council. Doom's network of embedded agents closely studied the power structure of the Foundation and did all they could to penetrate the many layers of classification that the Foundation's most powerful members hid behind. Eventually, all of their locations would be triangulated, and with the taking of Site-19, Doom would provide the ultimate illustration of why it's futile to resist his power. They would fall in line, or they would die. Soon enough, the day came. The first domino would fall, then all the others. Dr. Doom alerted his Foundation sleeper agents that when the signal came, it would be time to lower the gates and cause chaos. Then, the signal came. One clone embedded in the central security terminal pulled out a laser weapon and disintegrated the guards around him before they even knew that they were dead. An auspicious start. He approached the main console and began turning off different security protocols. Of course, the failsafes would kick in and keep some of the most dangerous monsters under lock and key, but they'd planned for that as well. Other sleeper agents across the site are awakening. They draw their weapons and start firing on their supposed co-workers. Response time will be slower than expected, given the first layer of security has already been kneecapped by the clones in the control room. But now it's time to really get this party started. Embedded agents in the containment wing move in towards some of the most dangerous anomalies in the site, the kind whose containment procedures are protected by failsafes upon failsafes. The agents unveil their smuggled tools, adamantium chainsaws, a handy little invention that Dr. Doom created when he needed to perform brain surgery on the Incredible Hulk. But they were equally effective at carving through the reinforced metal of containment chamber doors. Soon, a legion of deadly anomalous monsters, chief among them SCP-682, would be wandering the halls of the SCP Foundation, maiming and killing everyone they encountered. From the outside, mobile task forces were dispatched with the intention of getting this chaos under control. That's when Dr. Doom activated the next phase of the plan, the outside assault. Doombots, the deadly cloaked robotic emissaries of Dr. Doom, each one mapped on his own diabolical consciousness, made their move. They sprung up from under the sand, flew in from the sky, marched in from the mountains, releasing an onslaught of lasers and missiles onto the Foundation fortress. The guards, most of which were armed with pistols, submachine guns, and assault rifles, are easily outmatched. Their bullets can't even penetrate the thick armor of the Doombots, leaving them disadvantaged in the opening salvo. Many fall dead as lasers cleave through them. Then descends the Latvian shock troops, devoted acolytes of Doom, teleporting into the desert to lead a grand assault on Site-19. With them and the Doombots and the clones working to undermine the Foundation's efforts inside, it looks like the forces of Doom might have this one in the bag. Until the arrival of MTF Nu 7, Hammerdown. Tanks and armored all-terrain vehicles roll in. Attack helicopters descend. F-35 scramble far above. Hammerdown is a battalion strength force equipped with some of the Foundation's most dangerous and advanced weaponry. With this piece on the chessboard, the battle was far from assured. High-powered rifles and EMP weapons turned the tables on the Doombots. While they previously seemed unbeatable, now they were dropping like flies. The Latvian militants, despite their weaponry, also found themselves coming up short against the superior training and tactics of the Hammerdown agents, whose skills had been honed in real combat scenarios against terrifying, anomalous opponents. They routed the Latvians, cutting off their supply lines and splitting their forces. They went from an organized fighting force to a panicked rabble of supervillain worshippers. Back in his Latvian palace, Dr. Doom was watching. His heartbeat didn't even raise as he watched his troops and Doombots falling left and right. He didn't want to get his gauntlets dirty if he didn't have to, but if the situation called for it, he was happy to be the titanium finger on the scale. Dr. Doom teleported into the heart of Site-19. Guards and members of Hammerdown unleashed hell upon him, but the bullets merely ricocheted off his almost indestructible armor. The Doombots were, when push came to shove, just a pale imitation of their ultimate leader.
You think you have this situation under control, he growled. Your pitiful Foundation, pretenders to the throne. You think you can order the world from the shadows. You think it can be saved without being changed. I alone have the power to save the world, to bring peace and order. I am not the treatment. I am the cure. I am Doom.
The guards went in to try to subdue Doom physically, but his directed energy blasts sent them careening into the nearby walls. He stomped through the halls, beating or blasting anyone who dared get in his way. Of course, it wasn't long before they decided not to engage at all. It did about as much good as trying to hold back an advancing tide. Doom, remembering the schematics of the base by heart, walks effortlessly, hacking or smashing through any barrier in his way, until he reaches the office of the site director. With a swift kick, he knocked down the door and entered the room, grabbing the site director by the throat.
I have come to bargain,
Doom said. A week later, a new meeting of the O5 Council had assembled in the aftermath of the attack, deciding the best way to reconsolidate their resources, restructure their departments, and better prepare for the future. As the meeting was called to order, O5-1 addressed his fellow council members.
We realize that things have been difficult lately, but in the middle of adversary lies opportunity. In the aftermath of this setback, I am confident that the SCP Foundation will rise from the ashes and become a more powerful and effective organization than it has ever been before, he said to measured applause. Which reminds me, before we proceed with our agenda for the day, I would like to introduce our new council member. Welcome to the Foundation, O5-14. At the head of the table, O5-14, perhaps better known as Victor Von Doom, nodded approvingly.
Thank you. I am pleased to be here, he said. Now, let us discuss my new plan regarding management.
Explosions rocked the asphalt as 18 huge wheels rumbled alongside it. SCP Foundation armored vehicles rolled down the highway after a certain Freightliner FL-86 cab over a semi-truck, which was more than meets the eye. The front of the procession opened fire with the artillery turrets mounted on the back of the cars. Bullets impacted the truck trailer, but did not pierce through because the durability of the target was far too high. In an instant, the Freightliner transformed from a brightly colored terrestrial vehicle into none other than Optimus Prime, who returned fire. The projectiles from his barrage cannon fully decimated several of the vehicles that were attacking him, but more rolled in to replace them. He activated his jet wings and soared above the skyline of the city, blasting more of the pesky humans with his ion blaster. Below, cars exploded as drivers tucked and rolled to safety. On the rooftops, a slew of Mobile Task Force agents dropped their cloaking devices and mounted bigger guns against the surface. With many thunderous reports, the guns bombarded against the metallic body of Optimus Prime. The caliber was high enough to scratch the Autobot's armor, and Optimus wouldn't take that lying down. He brought forth his almighty Energon axe and slashed one of the giant artillery guns into 2 halves, which exploded. Just then, MTF operatives zoomed into view with jet wings of their own and adapted Energon weaponry. Optimus Prime cringed in pain as the stolen Autobot technology inflicted a decent chunk of damage onto his mechanical form. He tried to retaliate with his Energon axe, but the human-sized targets were moving too swiftly to be struck. Switching tactics, Optimus abandoned his axe and deployed an Energon minigun. The rate of fire was so rapid that it not only caught up to the jetpack users, but also destroyed all of the Foundation artillery that remained on the rooftop. Optimus Prime scanned for new targets, but one found him first. It was SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile, who had also grown jet wings in order to reach the heroic Autobot leader and cut into his robotic flesh with its claws. Optimus Prime emptied the clip of his Energon minigun into the imposing scaly frame of 682 and was immediately filled with regret. All the attack had managed to do was give SCP-682 a taste for Energon and the anomalous ability to wield it. Optimus Prime and SCP-682 clashed against each other with weapons of pure Energon before a tense chase broke out across the cityscape between the two of them. In the lead of this race was Optimus Prime, who had converted back into his semi-truck form. Behind the Autobot was SCP-682 in the form of a Tesla Cybertruck, because even the Transformers' signature power was just feeding the ever-evolving combat capabilities of the reptile. The two trucks zoomed into a long tunnel, where SCP-682 demonstrated an Energon harpoon which hooked itself onto Optimus Prime's trailer. Both anomalies swerved and smashed around and through the other cars in the tunnel, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. It was the deadliest drag race in history between a giant robot and an immortal lizard. On the other side of the tunnel, Optimus Prime returned to his humanoid form and ripped the Energon harpoon out of his chest with his bare cybernetic hands. He then launched a pair of Energon hooks from his own arsenal, which stabbed into the partially mechanized flesh of SCP-682 and flipped its newly car-like body upside down. Optimus then stomped directly on the engine pipe-laden underbelly of the reptile until it was nothing more than a smear of oil and primordial sludge. Naturally, SCP-682 started to regenerate back into its formidable combat-ready shape, so Optimus Prime unleashed the full capacity of his Energon weapons and nearly atomized the hard-to-destroy reptile. Even this was not enough to defeat 682, but Optimus Prime used his jet wings so that he'd be far away when the lizard was back to full strength. The rest of his pursuers from the SCP Foundation would be on his trail soon, so he couldn't slow down. Meanwhile, the intrepid pilots of Mobile Task Force Sigma-9, the SCP Foundation's private air force, are flying at top speed after the Decepticon Starscream in his fighter jet mode. A scrambling sky full of missiles threatened to pen in the alien robot with a fiery doom, but Starscream was faster than any Earth ballistics could hope to keep pace with. With a perfectly executed dynamic turn, Starscream pivoted with his jet turbines and redirected the heat-seeking missiles back into the planes that fired them. The surviving MTF parachuters descended towards the ground, ashamed of their critical loss. A few of the Sigma-9 jets managed to avoid being destroyed in the explosions caused by the fallout of Starscream's slick maneuvers. These lucky few let loose a barrage of minigun fire onto the Decepticon, which didn't do much damage, but was enough to anger the alien warrior. Starscream's ego was punctured more than his metal hide, but in a rage, he smashed through the nearest plane and transformed into his full humanoid shape. He karate-chopped another plane, which spun out and collided with a third, causing a massive explosion. Starscream then launched out a trio of his own missiles, each homing in on a jet and blasted their targets to bits. Sigma-9 wasn't done yet, though, as the reserve pilots moved into formation towards the now extremely maddened Starscream. Using his insane, blistering speed, Starscream activated his saw and carved its length through an incoming jet. The second that the blade of the saw hit the middle of the jet, its engines blew and showered Starscream with debris. Starscream dive-bombed out of the cloud of smoke and sawed through more fighter jets. With a loud and sudden kaboom, Starscream panicked as a missile somehow struck his jetwing and caused him to spin and fall to the ground. As he rose to his giant robo feet, he noticed human-sized combatants racing towards him. It was SCP-2419, the Laughing Men, who started jumping onto Starscream and used their enhanced strength to pummel dents into the material of his body. Starscream retaliated with a furious hatred for these tiny Earthlings, but no matter how much he crushed them and how little mercy he showed them, the Laughing Men could not be stopped. While Starscream struggled relentlessly, several Laughing Men worked together and tore the engine out of his other jetwing. Now grounded, the Decepticon lieutenant was in a dire position and could only hope to temporarily stun his immortal foes. There seemed to be no escape for Starscream, but nonetheless, he deployed his biggest guns to give the Laughing Men a real fight. Meanwhile, elsewhere, sand kicks up around the roaring treads of a brutal tank, ripping through the desert as an Apache attack helicopter strafe above, unleashing a barrage of advanced missiles. Boom, boom, boom. It deftly weaves around the explosions, showing dexterity thought to be impossible by a standard M1 Abrams, and that is because this is no ordinary Abrams. Mines explode under the treads, zapping shrapnel into the undercarriage, which has no effect. It keeps moving as the SCP Foundation helicopters chase on. They deployed the heavy machine guns, peppering the metal shell of the tank with bullets. The tank was undeterred. Whoever was driving must have had nerves of steel, or energon. As the helicopters prepared for another volley, the main gun on the tank swiveled towards one of the helicopters and let off an explosive shell. A direct hit. One of the helicopters exploded, killing the men inside instantly. The second helicopter fell back, knowing it would soon meet the same fate as ground vehicles fell in. ATVs fitted with heavy machine guns and grenade launchers flanked the rogue tank from one side, as other tanks controlled by the Foundation were in hot pursuit. Bang, bang, bang. Machine gun bullets and the combustion of missiles and tank fire fills the air, and yet the rogue tank still persists, deflecting or dodging every single hit. Then it suddenly turned and started fighting back. A beam of pure offensive energon laser power fired out, cleaving through several tanks in one and leaving their drivers as burnt-up husks. But the tank does not stop. It forges forward and smashes through the broken tanks in its way as the ATVs scramble to get around it, firing more guns at the rogue tank. Then, with a flash of energon, the tank transformed, folding into the deadly Decepticon tyrant known as Megatron.
All will bow before Megatron!
Bellowed the robot. From under the various metal flaps of his armor, Stinger rockets blasted out, swarming towards the various vehicles dotted at his metal feet. Kaboom! A symphony of explosions rings out across the desert, unleashing deadly radiation that will give people cancer for years to come. Across the desert, a Chinook rampages through the air, making a beeline for Megatron and all his chaos. Inside, Samsara, the ultimate elite mobile task force, loads its advanced energy weapons. As the Chinook gets closer, they leap out of the vehicle and land in the sand below, wasting no time in firing their weapons at Megatron. The Decepticons were shocked by weapons that would actually hurt him, and quickly turned his ionic cannons against Samsara and returned fire, flipping and pirouetting madly to avoid the lasers. Samsara were undeterred, zeroing in to get closer to their far larger foe, blasting relentlessly. But in getting closer, they fell into Megatron's trap. The Decepticon charged forward with a decisive strike, smashing one of the 4 Samsara members under his mighty metal fist. Then, it was a massacre. He kicked a second, throwing them up far into the air as their laser fired impotently up into the air. Only 2 left, and Megatron grabbed one in each hand. With no mercy, he smashed them into each other, reducing them to piles of corrupted cyborg flesh. Little did Megatron know, a giant cargo plane was hovering high overhead, preparing for another contingency to be activated. The doors in the bottom of the plane opened, and a huge metal box fell from the heavens, plummeting towards the desert floor. The box opened, and out flew SCP-096, like the evil of Pandora's forces, and as Megatron registered 096's terrible face, it immediately entered its homicidal rage state. 096 charged in for Megatron, yelling and screaming, its long arms bounding across the dirt. Megatron deployed a wrist-mounted machine gun and unleashed hell onto the beast, but it shrugged off every bullet and continued its rampage. The Shy Guy leapt, reaching for Megatron with its grasping claws, but he backhanded the beast, sending it skidding across the desert. Before 096 could move again, Megatron zoomed in and punched the monster with his huge metal fist, punching and kicking again and again, alternating between firing energon beams and firing missiles, setting fire to its spindly body. But 096 wouldn't go down that easy. It started punching back, putting dents into Megatron's metal exoskeleton. He tried to block, but the monster was shockingly fast, clawing deep gashes into the armor, bleeding oil and energon. The Decepticon felt a twinge of mortal terror for the first time as he flung the Shy Guy off of himself, sending it tumbling across the desert. In a split second, he took on the form of a jet and zipped into the sky, leaving a deep red vapor trail. But that didn't mean he was out of the woods yet. With a running start, 096 leapt off the ground and jumped onto the jet, still clawing and tearing, screaming relentlessly. His claws dug into Megatron's engines and ripped them free, sending the jet careening down into the nearby mountains and exploding into a great ball of fire and smoke. Is Megatron still alive in there? But we can't worry about that right now. In the middle of a nearby crowded metropolitan city center, Bumblebee, the plucky yellow Autobot, is going toe-to-toe with SCP-076, Abel, the Immortal Warrior. The warrior presses a huge obsidian chainsaw up against the yellow chassis of his opponent, sending sparks everywhere as the lovable Autobot gave a sharp exclamation of pain. The warrior did not let up. The pain noises from a fearful foe just excited his bloodlust. He kept striking Bumblebee's armor with his chainsaw, hoping to carve through and strike at something vulnerable inside. Bumblebee transformed his arm into his trademark plasma cannon and fired a blast at Abel, shattering the chainsaw before delivering a punch to Abel's tattooed chest, sending him flying back through the office window behind him in a shower of glass. But there was no respite for Bumblebee. Abel immediately leapt back out of the building, now wielding a huge obsidian club from one of his deadly pocket dimensions. He brought it down onto Bumblebee's head before he even had a chance to react, sending the unfortunate Autobot tumbling back down to the asphalt. Abel struck him again and again, each blow somehow feeling more deadly and decisive. Bumblebee did what Transformers do best and transformed, shifting into the iconic yellow VW Beetle we know and love, and driving directly into Abel, beginning a brutal test of strength. Anomalous man versus alien car. Bumblebee had the advantage as Abel lost his ground, the car driving directly into his chest and knocking him against the wall. With one powerful acceleration, Bumblebee could eliminate the diabolical warrior's life. But there was a problem. A young child was running through the ruined streets, passing directly between Abel and Bumblebee. The pragmatic warrior seized his chance, reaching out and grabbing the child, using them as a human shield. Bumblebee, always having a soft spot for humans, was unable to drive forward and defeat his foe. That's when the rest of the elite Pandora's Box Mobile Task Force struck, using energon-disabling technology to freeze Bumblebee in his car form in place and load him onto the back of a secure truck for easy transport. In the Titan-class SCP Foundation containment sites, far from the prying eyes of populated areas, 4 new anomalies remain contained: Optimus Prime, the heavily damaged Megatron and Starscream, and the unfortunate Bumblebee, who had learned a hard lesson from his mistake that day. When dealing with far more ruthless opponents, there's no room for mercy if you want to succeed. The SCP Foundation has dealt with its fair share of superheroes. From the delightful SCP-2800, the prickly Scottish vigilante known as Cactus Man, to the utterly tragic SCP-2241, also known as the superhero wannabe. But we couldn't help but wonder, what if the SCP Foundation went up against a truly evil anomalous force that simply masqueraded as a superhero? And we couldn't think of a character who fits this bill better than Homelander from The Boys, the hit TV series produced by our arch-nemesis at Amazon. Homelander is rotten to the core, and has a wide range of superpowers that allow him to make his darkest desires a reality. And that's why, today, we're powering up the Anomatron 6000, filling it with all 3 current seasons of The Boys, and posing the big question. Could the SCP Foundation bring this sadistic soup to his knees, or is he just too diabolical? Let's find out. People love superheroes. They love that warm, cozy feeling that soups give them, a golden beacon of righteousness to swoop out of the sky and save the day so we don't have to do it ourselves. But you see, the thing about superheroes is they aren't always nice. If the whole world holds someone up on a pedestal, makes them believe from a young age that they can do no wrong, that they're the ultimate paragon of virtue, and that they have the powers and freedom to do anything they want, well, you end up with him, the Homelander. Now, some look to Homelander as a hero, and why wouldn't they? He flies around saving people, wearing those distinctive stars and stripes on his back, and stars in all those movies about how great he is. But that's just a cover story, the publicly acceptable story put out by Vought, the company responsible for creating him in the first place. They're there to sweep under the rug any bad thing that Homelander or any of their so-called superheroes has ever done, so that nobody will ever figure out the truth. And what is the truth? Well, as far as soups go, Homelander's even worse than the very worst of the worst. He's a murderous, self-absorbed, narcissistic psychopath with no empathy for powerless human beings. He thinks of himself as superior to the rest of us. Ordinary people are just expendable, and he'll gladly allow an entire plane full of innocent civilians to die with little care or remorse. Oh, but Homelander will play all that up for the cameras, though, which is why nobody would ever think to question his status as a hero. As far as the public knows, Homelander's actions are always justified, and that he can do no wrong. And it's this mentality that allows him to carry on doing whatever he wants with total impunity. But what if everyone turned on Homelander? Say his cover was finally blown and the rest of the world got to see him as he really is. A murderer with too much power, rampant insecurity, an explosive temper, and some nasty, lingering parental issues. Sure, getting a look at the real Homelander might be a cause for celebration from his most hardcore fanboys, allowing them to rally behind what they think he stands for. But what if we all had enough? What if everybody rejected Homelander? As it turns out, that might be the final straw that breaks him. By his own admission, Homelander would much prefer to be loved by everyone. But if you take that away, he's more than happy to settle for being feared. And with the level of power that he has, flight, super strength, invulnerability, heat vision, all it would take would be a show of his abilities in order to incite fear. And now, it's happened. The love anyone had for Homelander is gone. Maybe his crimes have finally been exposed, or he might have laser visioned someone in broad daylight. Regardless of the spark that started it, the fire has started burning. And now he's no longer chained. Homelander is free to do whatever he wants. He started tactically taking out key structures of influence in the United States. The White House went first, the red-hot beams of his laser eyes carving through the entire building, separating staff and Secret Service members at the waist or the neck, splattering the walls with blood. The, quote, world's greatest superhero took care of the president personally, melting him down with his heat vision before flying away. Next on his list of targets was the Pentagon, shrugging off bullets and tank shells from the United States military as they were rapidly deploying to stop him. It didn't take long for Homelander to cut through the soldiers sent to stop him, before demolishing the Pentagon with as little as a supersonic clap of his hands. As the building crumbled around him, so did a number of the country's defenses fall as well. But there was one last line of defense. One organization that just might have access to the means to bring the only man in the sky back down to ground level. The SCP Foundation were no strangers to powerful beings running amok, but they were the only ones with the means to oppose a rampage like this. Now, while Homelander had already decimated much of the regular armed forces, the Foundation brought an army of their own to bear. Enter the Mobile Task Forces, the organization's most elite special operatives. They're specifically trained to deal with threats well beyond the capabilities of the regular military and can be quickly deployed almost anywhere in the world at a moment's notice, ready for action. Mobilizing their collected forces, the Foundation dispatched its MTFs at once. They had to be smart. Homelander was playing this tactically, taking out centers of influence and defense capabilities, still unleashing his years' worth of bottled-up rage, but using it in a controlled, calculated way. If they sent every mobile task force to where Homelander was, he could easily fly away at supersonic speeds, outmaneuver them, or just disintegrate the Foundation's entire reserve of troops in one move. So their primary goal was to divide and conquer, and spread their MTFs across the country so that anywhere Homelander went, they would be waiting for him. Of course, the fall of the regular military had already shown that conventional weapons had little to no effect on Homelander. He is completely resistant to almost every form of physical harm, not only completely bulletproof, but unfazed by explosions as well. On top of that, his powers for detecting threats were also unparalleled. Homelander had the ability to see through almost any solid object or surface using X-ray vision. However, the Foundation knew there was a limit to this ability, and that the Soup couldn't see through certain metals, specifically zinc. He also had tremendous olfactory and auditory senses, well beyond that of any ordinary human being. Homelander could detect changes in smell on such an acute level that he could detect changes to someone's adrenaline levels, as well as using that ability to detect explosives. But it was his super hearing that the Foundation was planning to exploit. They knew Homelander's senses were so attuned, he could detect changes in a person's heartbeat, enough to know when someone was lying. However, having such a high level of sensitive hearing meant that Homelander had at least one vulnerability: high-frequency sound waves. The Foundation knew it wouldn't be enough to kill the man in the sky, but they had another trick up their sleeve for that. First, they needed to draw him out. But how would they, when Homelander could easily overhear the orders being broadcast to their troops? Simple, they could lie. The Foundation started issuing falsified directions to its MTFs on the ground. Each one followed up with a written digital message via each troop's heads-up display. All Foundation operatives were reminded to disregard any radio communications, that these weren't real orders, merely just interference to throw Homelander off what they were actually doing. While the fake radio orders were attempting to nudge Homelander closer and closer towards New York, which was where Vought Tower, his headquarters, were located, one team was already there lying in wait: Mobile Task Force Pi 1, also known by the codename City Slickers. They had received a coded message from the Foundation. They were instructed to infiltrate Vought Tower, retrieve an item from the company's research and development labs, and then make their way to the roof. Once they were there, the next stage of the plan was to administer what they found in R&D, and await an airdrop of high-frequency sonic weaponry that the Foundation was sending to aid them. Storming Vought Tower had been the surprisingly easy part. The entire company had fallen into chaos. Now that their #1 product was raining death from the sky, the employees at Vought didn't seem to care much about their jobs anymore. The City Slickers had snuck into the laboratory and found what they were sent for: Temporary Compound 5, a chemical that would alter human biology and grant anyone superpowers for a 24-hour period. It had the nasty side effect of turning the user's brain into Swiss cheese, but under the circumstances, it seemed necessary. Dosing themselves with it, all the City Slickers were in agony as they felt the V-24 burning in their veins. Just as the chopper was arriving to drop off their weaponry, a loud booming sound rang out, shattering windows across the city as Homelander's approach broke the sound barrier. The MTF stared up in horror as his laser vision cut through the helicopter above their heads, one of the crates landing on the roof as the fiery wreck plummeted down towards the street.
Jackson!
The team leader yelled to one of his men before pausing. He knew that if he told them to retrieve the sonic cannon, Homelander would destroy it in seconds. Instead, Jackson watched as his commanding officer leaped up into the air hundreds of feet higher than he would normally have been capable of. He careened towards a surprised Homelander, swinging a compound V-fueled uppercut that connected with his jaw, reeling him slightly as he hovered above. Taking that as their cue, the other members of the City Slickers started attacking the out-of-control Soup. One of them was firing energy blasts from his palms, and another had her arms stretching out like rubber, grabbing Homelander's cape in an attempt to drag him out of the sky. Meanwhile, Jackson was scrambling across the roof of the tower, fumbling with the clasps on the crate that contained the weapon. He could hear snarling behind him as Homelander roared in disapproval, disgusted that these so-called ordinary people were daring to attack him. His heat vision burned through the City Slickers' uniforms, but couldn't pierce their skin. Enraged, Homelander gripped the commander's head as he made another jump towards him, pushing both his super strong hands together until he could hear the man's skull beginning to crack. Then he kept squeezing. Flattening the commander between his palms, Homelander flew downwards, landing a dual-fisted punch that burst through the chests of the other two slickers. He pulled both hands back, his red gloves, like the rest of his uniform, already slickened with copious amounts of blood. Then, a loud shrieking sound pierced his attuned ears as Jackson fired the sonic cannon. The cacophony of high-frequency sound waves it emitted were deafening to Homelander's attuned, sensitive ears, sending pain shooting through his head. Unfortunately, pain meant little to Homelander, and he could still function despite it. It angered him even further that someone was trying to best him, that they'd highlighted and tried to exploit a weakness, something the Soup had told himself he didn't have. He shot forwards lightning fast, wrenching the device out of Jackson's hands before gripping him by the throat, lifting him up off his feet so that he was dangling over the edge of the tower.
Who in the hell do you think you are?
Homelander muttered, disturbingly subdued despite the obvious unhinged look in his eyes.
Just...
Jackson gasped for breath as he felt fingers clasping around his fault. In the distance, there was a low, rhythmic rumbling, like an earthquake, or heavy footsteps getting closer.
Just a distraction.
With that, Homelander's hand closed tight the very second that Jackson teleported out of his grip, leaving the Soup standing on the roof alone, save for the bodies of the other city slickers. He turned to face the sound of the oncoming footsteps, detecting the sound of whirring machinery along with it. This was something new. It was rare for Homelander to ever face a real challenge. Nothing ever forced him to improve his skills in combat. In most cases, he could just rely on his strength, or bring a quick end to confrontations with his eye lasers, which made the sight of SCP-5514 approaching all the more surprising to him. Striding across the city like something out of a Pacific Rim movie was a gigantic mech, known as SCP-5514, or by its far cooler-sounding nickname, the Dragon Slayer. Working with the Global Occult Coalition and High Brazil, the Foundation themselves constructed SCP-5514 using various anomalous methods, designing the machine to combat large-scale aggressors, or LSAs. While the Dragon Slayer, like the name implies, was built with fighting monsters and kaiju similar to its own size, these desperate times had called for desperate measures. The mech's huge robotic arm hosted its primary weapon, a cold iron sword, its blade 20 meters long. Inside, Mobile Task Force 8 of 5, the Jaeger bombers, were piloting the Dragon Slayer, readying for battle with Homelander. He was staying still, not attempting to run or even fly away. Instead, he stayed at the top of Vought Tower. It was like he was waiting, watching, unfazed by the approaching humanoid machine, looking right at it, or through it. The Dragon Slayer brought its cold iron sword swooping down through the air, the blade coming right down on where Homelander stood. It cleaved directly through the building beneath him, carving Vought Tower in two, sending a shower of glass and concrete over the plaza below. The Soup caught the blade as it came at him, screaming in pain as he felt it cut into his hands. Any wound left by the cold iron sword was permanent. There was no regeneration or recovering from it. Homelander's natural durability gave him an edge. That, and being so much smaller than the sword itself, allowed him not to be sliced to pieces, but even touching it through his gloves hurt. The tower was rubble. Homelander was down, but far from out. He climbed up through the debris and bodies he was buried under, not caring when he blasted his heat vision through the dead and wounded to clear a path back up. Looming above, the Dragon Slayer stood taller than most buildings, his eyes glowing both with anger and the red light of his lasers. Homelander pushed himself up off the ground and flew up into the air. The mech's arm moved weightlessly to swat him out of the air, but Homelander used his speed and momentum to shoot through the metal, ripping through the machine's hand before it could land a strike. Homelander started zipping out of the path of the Dragon Slayer as it opened fire with its various anomalous armaments. While the mech was primarily used for close-quarters melee combat with various LSAs, it also featured a number of longer-range weaponry. Mounted on SCP-5514's shoulder was a Beowulf Sigurd railgun, an anomalous weapon that could use altered gravity to affect the weight of its targets, causing projectiles to impact with higher velocity. Yet none of these projectiles landed a shot, unable to catch Homelander at his current flight speed. With every supersonic pass he made of the Dragon Slayer, the deranged Soup took another look at his current enemy. His X-ray eyes could penetrate most of the metal and gave him a clear enough view of what was inside. There was a miniature sun powering it, kept perpetually stable while it generated energy for SCP-5514. Surrounding it were subdimensional portals, venting the excess heat off this plane of reality so that the mech and nothing around it melted. A similar process was moving some of the substantial weight of the mech into a tiny pocket dimension, which had allowed it to move so swiftly without being too cumbersome. Piloting it were humans, more MTF operatives. Spotting them through the metal hull, Homelander flew towards the Dragon Slayer like a bullet. The force of the impact caused the mech to wobble slightly as Homelander shot through the outer layers of armor. He came bursting out into the main chamber, eyes burning intense lasers through the vital inner components of the Dragon Slayer. The beam sliced the unprotected MTFs up, reducing them to a bloody paste before Homelander turned his rage towards the power source. Ripping through more of the metalwork, he looked at the housing for the subdimensional portals venting out of the mini-sun's heat. Though he had a limited understanding of what exactly this all was, Homelander could make sense of what it was doing. He fired off another series of blasts with his heat beams, tearing through the devices that regulated the portals before flying back out of the Dragon Slayer as fast as he could. Landing at its feet, he looked up to see his despicable handiwork. From within, the subdimensional portals began pulling the insides of SCP-5514 in different directions, pulling it apart and sucking it into different pocket dimensions as it collapsed in on itself. Homelander sighed, the tiniest hint of fatigue he felt passing in a fleeting moment, gone before the Dragon Slayer eventually fell.
Enough! Cease this villainy!
A voice called from nearby. Homelander sighed in exasperation to face this latest nuisance that dared oppose him. When he saw the shadowy figure approaching him, he was taken aback at first, thinking he recognized who it was.
Noir?
He asked in disbelief.
No, that is not my name,
the dark-clad figure announced.
Homelander of the Seven, your time has come. For now, you face the Spectre.
Otherwise known as SCP-4494, was the physical embodiment of crime fighting itself. Its long, dark cloak whipped in the wind, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, giving it the appearance of a shadowy gunslinger. From head to toe, the Spectre seemed to pull all light on the visible spectrum into itself, making it look like a ghostly shadow come to life. "And how the hell do they expect you to stop me?" Homelander sneered.
I go wherever injustice reigns, the Spectre
replied, not short on dramatic flair.
And you have unleashed horrific, unspeakable terror on the innocents of this world. I will ask you once, and once only. Stop this. Walk away.
Immediately, Homelander started laughing.
Really? That's all you've got?
He scoffed.
Just asking nicely.
You've lost your way,
SCP-4494 declared.
All this destruction, and for what? Just to display your power? To subjugate? Make people fear you? Or are you still trying to win the approval of a mother and father you never had?
The last sentence struck a nerve with Homelander, enough to make him zip forward, launching a punch at the Spectre. His fist passed through a dark fog that took the place of its intended target, as SCP-4494 dissipated and then reformed behind Homelander. It put two shadowy arms around his neck, gripping the maddening soup in a headlock.
You were made to be a hero, the Spectre whispered. Look at how far you've fallen.
Homelander angrily wrenched the arm away and threw his captor over his head, only for
the Spectre
to become a mist again, surrounding the hero in a thick, black cloud. He fired his heat vision again, the beams passing through the layer of fog without causing any damage.
It's over, Homelander. No longer will you terrorize the innocent,
came a booming, dramatic voice from all angles.
You are not the hero you think of yourself as, but a villain. This mistake stops here.
This isn't a mistake. I don't make mistakes,
Homelander roared.
I'm not like the rest of you. I'm stronger, smarter, I'm better. I am better. I'm the real hero.
Are you?
Echoed
the Spectre's voice.
Something thin and papery landed at Homelander's feet, the fog dissipating again as
the Spectre stood before him.
Confused, Homelander picked up the papery object. It was a comic book, the words Action Comics emblazoned on the top. The cover showed a man dressed much like himself, lifting an old green car above his head, his red cape billowing in the wind. A letter S worn across his chest. As he flicked through the pages, tears formed in Homelander's eyes.
This is what you think you are, the Spectre said solemnly. But look around. Look at the lives you've taken or ruined. A hero? No. Heroism is not subjugating others, not viewing yourself as superior. Heroism is realizing we are all the same and standing up to those that would try to disagree. The Spectre
Brought his dark cloak around Homelander's shoulder. There were no survivors around to see where they went or to hear SCP-4494's final words.
You aren't a real hero.
And then they were gone.
It does not leave bodies, just blood smeared across the roads. Hundreds dead, thousands left wondering what happened to their missing family members as Foundation agents sneak into their homes and restructure their memories. One containment breach, one unfortunate photo of an impossible monster's face. All that's left is to clean up, bag the creature's head, and take it back to containment, hoping it would never be seen again. Far below, in a kingdom of fire, something even more diabolical takes an interest. Such power, such ferocity, such indiscriminate destruction. He hasn't seen anything like it in a long, long time, and he wants to get acquainted. Imagine being a creature so violent that you catch the devil's attention. Ugh, are those cobwebs? Gross, this place is filthy. I guess no one's been down here in a while. Hey, what's under this tarp? The Anomatron 6000. Looks like this thing hasn't seen a whole lot of use lately. What's the worst that could happen if I dusted it off? Chaos exploded beyond the doors of the ATV as they burst open. Steel-capped boots thumping against the asphalt and crunching shards of broken glass underfoot. The blindingly bright neon of the strip was dwarfing the flicker of flames, barely making much more light than the usual twinkling machines that offered hollow promises of winning big. Agent North felt his fingers flex around the grip of his rifle as he caught sight of the carnage unfolding through the shattered glass front of the Vegas hotel. Jazz, better activate your disruptor. One of his squad mates nudged him back to awareness. Whatever's going on in there, it's turning these folks into animals. The squad flipped on the anti-memetic devices that the tech boys had attached to their tactical helmets, keeping themselves safe from whatever had infected the civilians inside. Or so they believed. They formed up, approaching the building in a defensive pattern, and cautiously made their way inside. The report had called it a riot, but that seemed like an understatement. The place had been ransacked so badly it was barely recognizable as either the hotel or casino it advertised itself as. Slot machines had been smashed to pieces, the metal and plastic torn apart seemingly by hand, given the red streaks and fingernails embedded in some. Discarded chips lay strewn across the floor, those that weren't being carried by the armfuls scooped up in the shirts of the people that were left standing. Each of them was frenzied, feral, eyes wide and bloodshot, baring all their teeth as they scrapped together. Agent North spotted two men trading punches, clawing at each other on the blood-stained marble floor, with the body of another lying still beneath them. The members of Mobile Task Force Mu-0 kept their weapons raised, but the civilians' wrath seemed to be solely focused on each other. All except one. Sat calmly at a blackjack table was a man in a suit, calmly sipping wine from a tall glass and humming to himself. There is a house in New Orleans. He casually turned around in his seat to face the Foundation operatives as they approached, laser dots hovering over the open shirt beneath his suit jacket. Evening, boys. I'm surprised it took you so long to find me. After all, where else on this mortal coil would I be if not Sin City? I mean, I'm practically right next door. The man was flicking a playing card around his fingers, the 6 of hearts. Anyone want to play? How about a round of Devil's Grip? Oh, and you can take those fancy new gizmos on your helmets off. You look ridiculous.
But before we continue with any more of the Devil's Banter, a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to our mobile task force and their dealings with the devil. The team exchanged glances, but not one of them touched their disruptors. Agent North spoke up, demanding this mysterious figure release the civilians from his influence, as a precondition for any kind of negotiation here. Influence? I did not do that. The man shrugged, the card between his fingers switching to the King of Diamonds with a sleight of hand trick. You ask me, that's just a design flaw. But then again, you weren't all made in my image, were you? The agent's voice got louder, barking for the mystery man to submit to their demands immediately. The squad members all raised their assault rifles. If the stranger didn't release the civilians, they might be forced to use lethal force. Oh, you mean release them from their basic human instincts? Well, that seems a little bit cruel and unusual, even for your foundation. The man chuckled, finishing his wine. But if you insist. With a click of his fingers, the room went silent. Calm instantaneously spread among the people who had been literally tearing each other apart only seconds earlier. But taking more than a cursory glance at the civilian told the MTF operatives that there was still something wrong. Each of the people in the casino wore a vacant expression, eyes empty as if they were completely void of life. Agent North barked out a question. What had he done to these people? Now, Mr. North, the man said, standing up. A deal is a deal. Convey me to the Foundation. I've been waiting for the sightseeing part of my vacation. Hearing his name from this unknown, clearly anomalous reality warper made Agent North instinctively raise his gun. The man staring down the barrel didn't flinch. Instead, a wry smile crawled across his face. Oh, come now, Mr. North. Perhaps I shouldn't have expected rationality. Oh, that's a little beyond you, isn't it? The figure chuckled, everything about him filling the MTF operatives with an overpowering sense of dread as they kept their weapons trained on him. So many nights wondering about your wife, whether or not she forgave you for that accident. The man took a step forward until the rifle's muzzle was pushing directly against him. Would you like to know the truth, Mr. North? His voice lowered to an ominous whisper. She never did. Bang! The shot echoed through the casino floor, a faint trail of smoke winding up into the air. Agent North blinked in disbelief. In the flash that followed him pulling the trigger, the figure standing before him and his squad mates had vanished. They scanned the area to try and spot their target, only to be met with pitch-dark shadows surrounding them. Came the man's voice through the emptiness. You can't kill the devil, Jeremy. Back at command, the Foundation analysts were panicking. MTF Mu-0 had vanished. They scrabbled around trying to figure out what to do. Someone threw out the suggestion that the full force of Alpha 1, the Red Right Hand, be dispatched to Las Vegas to launch a full-scale assault on SCP-4661, the area of the city that anomalously overlapped with another plane of reality, causing sinful behavior to intensify within Vegas. Another threw out the idea, suggesting that SCP-507 should be sent to retrieve the dimensionally displaced task force. As they squabbled, researchers and security found themselves being drawn into an argument, all of them feeling an overwhelming notion that they were right and everyone disagreeing with them was wrong. What had begun as a tactical discussion devolved into a free-for-all. Shoves turned into swings of fists, the hurling of office chairs as a brawl ensued. Little did any personnel notice an unauthorized new arrival, who seemed to be walking around the facility's halls.
It was the same man from the casino, strolling calmly and casually past the windowed containment cells that housed anomalies, like an eccentric collector perusing an art gallery. Boring, the man scoffed, seeing an orange blob shrink away from him behind the glass. Also boring. He passed a beak-faced doctor in dark clothes. Derivative. The man sighed, seeing a statue that refused to move even when he blinked. Absurdly overpowered. Within its acid-filled vat, the reptile seethed with anger. Oh, look, one of my antiques, the man mused, passing a vacant mahogany desk with 2 vacant chairs, a simpler straight-back seat, and a large, ornate throne-like office chair, embellished with brass and royal purple velvet padding. Then the man came to a windowless room, the one thing that seemed to garner his curiosity in the entire facility. In actuality, it wasn't the unassuming containment cell that caught his attention. It was the sounds of distraught crying emanating from within. The despaired sobs didn't deter the man from effortlessly waving his hands and causing the heavy, hermetically sealed door to start buckling, glowing as the dense steel began to melt. The molten metal door split apart, then cooled in an instant, leaving a gap in the entrance to the dark containment chamber. Sat in the far corner, rocking itself slightly, was a shape with legs and arms far too long to be hunched over comfortably in the cramped room. A paper bag had been left over its face, as the tall, wiry, thin creature gently rocked itself between sobs. SCP-096 had felt the same unease that now ran through the entire facility, and even with its face covered, it could sense its source getting closer with each step. Oh, enough, the figure said, walking into the cell, startling the shy guy. If I wanted to hear the desperate cries of the damned, I would have stayed home. The man clicked his fingers, causing flames to erupt out of nowhere, singeing the paper bag into nothing but ash in seconds. SCP-096 recoiled, pushing itself further into the corner, ineffectually covering its face with its elongated limbs. Now, don't cower. The man unnervingly, calmly offered out a hand to the creature. I did come all this way to see if the rumors were true. And just look at you, you're real. Even if I'm impressed. The rage of a creature that would kill a human just for the insolence of looking at it. Remarkable. Here, while everyone's hashing things out in the command center, what say you and I have a little chat about your future, 096? That's what they call you, isn't it? Slowly recognizing its designation, the shy guy turned, trembling to face the suited figure in its cell. The moment the man's eyes looked at its face, the anomalous creature could feel the familiar, intensifying rage that it was so accustomed to, urging it to lash out at the man and kill him on the spot. But somehow, it was being suppressed, like the figure's influence was enough to keep the rage state at bay, for now. Either that or, for maybe the first time ever, SCP-096 was too scared to attack. Oh, there's that handsome face, the man beamed. See, you wouldn't have to hide for hell's sake. You could be a real force for wanton chaos, my friend. Now, while I'm confined to only whisper in the ears of mortals, you should be getting out there and showing some abject misery. Look, there's a perfectly good desk of mine a few rooms away. What say we take a seat and strike up a deal? After all, better the devil you know. I can give you anything you truly desire, whether it's freedom from this place, revenge on the Foundation. If you're really all that insecure about it, I could even give you a facelift. In return, you have to do one thing for me. Let as many people see you as possible. Maybe even the whole world, even. Oh, you'd have so much killing to do. The very suggestion of being perceived by so many people was enough to enrage SCP-096. It broke free of whatever unfamiliar hold the figure had over it, hurling one of its arms out in a vicious swipe. Just as its fingers were about to reach the man, they passed through the now vacant spot where he had been standing. He had vanished within a split second that the shy guy had lunged at him. The anonymous creature wailed and screamed as the figure's voice echoed around the room, giving another sinister chuckle. Oh my, how disappointing, he sneered. To think you could have had anything you wanted. No matter. Screaming and trying to attack me won't do you any good either. I won't go down like some of the others that have snuck a forbidding glance at that mug of yours. My physical form isn't even really here. It's still trapped on the lowest layer. You're not the only one kept contained, my friend. I just use this human shape for personal travel above ground. But it seems my little vacation is coming to a halt. Here, won't you join me for the return trip? The ground beneath SCP-096's feet began to shudder violently, the floor cracking and crumbling away. But instead of bringing it crashing down to the floor of the facility below its cell, an amber volcanic glow rose between the cracks underfoot. Piece by piece, the floor broke away, some invisible force pulling SCP-096 downwards as it flailed its arms, clawing at the ground as it crumbled away until the Shy Guy lost its grip and began to plummet. Searing heat raged all around it, tongues of flame practically reaching out to singe the creature's body as it fell further and further. Its own wails and screams joined a deafening cacophony of others, of never-ending voices crying out in torment and suffering. After what felt like an eternity of falling and burning, SCP-096 hit the stony ground, the air pungent with the stench of brimstone. Sat before him on a chair adorned in brass and royal purple was the same man from earlier. As the Shy Guy staggered to its feet, the man's visage started to catch fire, slowly burning away to reveal the blood-colored skin and huge protruding horns of a fallen angel beneath the disguise. Perhaps after a several thousand-year stint in the Eighth Circle, you'll reconsider my generous offer. Satan chuckled before snapping his clawed fingers, causing SCP-096 to vanish in a burst of flame. Excruciating torture awaited the defenseless creature. The Prince of Darkness's underlings would see to that. But as he reclined on his throne, he didn't realize a tall, thin humanoid form reappeared behind him, eyes filled with a rage that didn't care if he was the devil. He should not have looked at its face. The devil struggles in the grasp of the nightmare he unknowingly brought down into his boiling kingdom. Perhaps there's a spell or some terrible curse that can free him from the monster's grasp, but somehow he knows that nothing will save him. He could flee to any of the Ninth Circles, and the monster would brave fire and brimstone to find him. He could throw the creature into a reoccurring pit of infinite darkness, and it would find its way back into the light. Somehow, in the same hubris that had gotten him cast out of heaven so many eons ago, the Lord of Darkness may have brought about his own destruction, and he may have thought he knew darkness, until the black maw of SCP-096 gaped open, and Satan himself beheld a darkness deeper and more permanent than any he had ever known. Now go check out What If SCP-096 Was Put Inside SCP-914? And can SCP-096 chase its victims across the multiverse for even more?